Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Audio Fanfics and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto became a Grey Warden, and Morrigan, Leliana, Tabris, Hinata&Ino chose him above all, Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. 19-year-old Naruto Uzumaki looked over Konoha from his place on the Hokage monument, his usual seat upon the fourth Hokage's head. The sun was rising on the horizon and Naruto knew that today was going to be the day. He used the leaf teleport and reappeared outside his apartment. I have a good feeling about today, he said as he entered and dressed in new clothes, something he picked up while out of the village. A pair of black cargo pants with numerous pockets. He'd sewn storage seals in them as well as several seals that would make his pants hard to damage. I hated tough missions where I ended up, he thought as he slipped on a black mesh shirt and the brand new leather jacket. He tied his headband around his waist and grabbed his goggles and placed them around his neck as a collar. His hair he pulled into a ponytail and then grabbed the fingerless gloves with metal plates on the back knuckles. He then put on the steel-toe combat boots and grinned at his image. He slipped on his kunai and shuriken pouches, then his scroll case. I look damn good, he said. Good enough to be crowned Hokage, he thought, and with that thought he left his apartment. Don't want to be late to my own coronation. XX. Hokage Tower. Tsunade looked at the pictures of her predecessors. Today she would announce the official 6th Hokage. She wanted to do it 3 years ago after the mess with Pain and then Danzo, but she'd taken up the post of Hokage again after her coma and hadn't had a chance with all the political maneuvering that was going on, and the council kept her very busy. That's a lie. I've had numerous chances, I just procrastinated in order to protect. Her thoughts were cut off as there was a knock at the door. Enter. She called knowing that Shizune was busy in the hospital. A man with tanned, weathered skin, a black beard and hair entered. She blinked at him. He was foreign, he wore armor and carried a sword and a dagger across his back. Duncan? She asked in disbelief. Tsunade. He greeted her. You look as beautiful as ever, he said, taking her hand in his gauntlet-covered one and gave it a gentlemanly kiss. And you've gotten more charming, she said, her honey brown eyes studying him. Has it been so long? She thought. You've gotten old on me, Duncan, she said, seeing some silver in his hair. It was his eyes that showed he found it amusing. Some of us approach age with dignity, he told her. Tsunade laughed. Not me. I face it then run away screaming in the opposite direction. Duncan chuckled. I was surprised to hear that you returned to Konoha and are the Hokage, he said, and took a seat that she offered. That's old news. I'm about to announce the next Hokage and retire to run the hospital and drink my free time away. She folded her hands. What brings you all the way to Konoha? It's nowhere near the lands you wander. And if I recall, you were joining some secret order last time we talked. Duncan smiled. My ship stopped here for supplies before we make the long journey to Ferelden. He sighed. A blight has started and I've been searching for aid, he looked at Tsunade hopefully. She shook her head. I wish I could, but the Council of Cages swore to not be involved on things not part of the elemental nations. And with the mists we are safe from the blight. I'm sorry, Duncan, I wish I could help you. My grandfather and uncle would have sent as many ninja as they could spare, but now, she sighed. Stupid politics, I'm not getting out of this too soon. Duncan shrugged. I'm sorry for bothering you. It was a vain hope, and I do understand. The elemental countries keep their own affairs. Then he had a wry grin. Of course a couple of ninja would have been nice. Before Tsunade could speak further, the door opened without any warning. Morning, Ba-chan. She sighed. While in truth she didn't mind the nickname he gave her, she wished that he would be formal in the office. Naruto, she said, and he realized she wasn't alone due to the tone of her voice. Sorry about that, Hokage-sama, he said, standing before her desk and giving her a slight bow. I thought you'd be alone, he explained. Tsunade sighed. She looked from Duncan towards the blonde who was her choice for Hokage. Naruto, I need to work on some things before I meet with the council. Could you show my old friend Duncan around Konoha? She looked at Duncan. You will stay for the ceremony, won't you? She asked him. I would be honored. The last time I witnessed a Hokage being named was your teacher, in fact. You knew the old man? Naruto asked, looking at Duncan, who laughed. I met him briefly last time I was here last. Tsunade raised an eyebrow. I'll speak with you later then. Duncan rose and made for the door. And Naruto, she began, and when the blonde looked at her she gave him a smile. Behave. Naruto laughed. When haven't I? Tsunade shook her head, not wanting to answer that. Go you scamp. See you at noon, she said. Naruto met Duncan at the bottom of the stairs. Have you seen Konoha before? He asked the warrior. I have, but a lot has changed since I was last here. Duncan said as they began to walk. So, you a samurai? Naruto asked. Duncan shook his head. I'm a gray warden. What's that? Naruto asked as they walked slowly. Many of the shops were opening for the day. Some store owners nodded at Naruto. Their treatment of him had changed greatly since his battle with Pain 3 years ago. Duncan chuckled. An order dedicated to battling dark spawn, creatures twisted and evil. Duncan answered, trying to simplify it for someone who never saw them before. Creatures of pure evil that will stop at nothing than wiping out all life as we know it. Naruto took this in. Is Konoha in danger from these dark spawn? No. Something keeps them contained to the lands of Ferelden and its neighboring lands. Duncan answered. Naruto was quiet as they moved about. Last time I was here, this was a dango shop. Duncan gestured towards a stand that now sold scrolls. I remember that place. It burned down when I was little. Naruto said. Naruto showed him to the academy. Ah, yes. This is still the same. Duncan said. I remember when I was here with my mentor, Sarutobi was trying to discipline one of his students. If I recall, it was about peeping on Tsunade. Duncan gave a chuckle. I just can't remember his name. He rubbed his beard in thought. Ero Sanin. Naruto said, then said. Jiraiya oil. And Duncan nodded. I wonder what happened to him and his friend. Naruto looked at the academy sadly. Sensei died and Orochimaru turned traitor and died a couple of years ago. Duncan sighed. I'm sorry to hear that. Both were great friends when I met them. Were their deaths, were they connected? Naruto shook his head and told Duncan how Jiraiya had died and gave a brief history of Orochimaru up until his death at Sasuke's hands. Duncan shakes his head. Such promise wasted. He muttered. Naruto shrugged. Orochimaru wanted power and immortality, instead he found himself friendless and alone in the end. Wise words. Duncan says and Naruto shrugs. Life lessons. He answers as they kept walking. Duncan looks up at the monument and studied the faces that had been added since his time here long ago. He recognizes Tsunade's and Hiruzen's. He looks at the face between them, then looks at his escort. My father. Naruto answers the unasked question. Duncan didn't ask, as it seemed to him that the blonde found it a touchy subject. They continued with Naruto showing him around from the merchant quarter to the renovated sections to what used to be the Uchiha district but now housed many new families. Have you eaten yet, Duncan-san? Naruto asked. No, I was going to eat before returning to my ship. Duncan answered. Come on, I'll show you where you can get the greatest ramen in the elemental nations. Duncan smiled at that and the young man led him back across the village to a humble-looking stand. Pushing aside the curtain, Naruto called out. Ayame-chan. Duncan entered and saw a young woman behind the counter. Naruto. She greeted. Your usual. The blonde nodded. And a bowl for Duncan-san to try. Ayame, as the woman was called, greeted him. What would you like to try? She asked. Duncan looked at the menu above the bar. I'll try the chicken and pork ramen, and a bottle of water please. He said, taking a seat at the bar. Naruto used the time to study the man more. The armor and weapons looked well used and cared for. The man's skin was dark and Naruto could tell it was from long hours under the sun. So how long have you known Tsunade? Duncan asked. Naruto shrugged. About 8 years, nearly 9. Naruto looked at the man. What about you? Duncan chuckled. I met Tsunade long ago. I was about 11 or 12 when I first met her when my mentor came to Konoha to speak with the Hokage. Naruto listened as Duncan told of his impressions of the Sannin when they were his age. Over the years my mentor had me learn everything from eating habits to politics. I even got a year of training in your ninja academy. Duncan said with a chuckle. I felt awkward but at the same time I was fascinated with everything I saw. The two ate their ramen and Duncan told stories of a younger Tsunade. They were nearly finished when the tarp over the entrance opened, showing several members of Konoha's Anbu. Uzumaki. The one wearing the boar mask said. Yes, Does Ba-chan need me yet? The blonde asked and blinked at seeing 7 Anbu standing there. You are to come with us to the council chamber. Boar said in a very neutral voice. Duncan an eyebrow at this man's tone. Naruto seemed to notice how tense the Anbu were. What's going on? He asked. Ayame returned from the back room, and when Naruto turned to see her, 2 of the Anbu leapt and took him to the ground. A third rushed up and bound his hands and fingers. You'll pay for what you've done, monster. The eagle-masked Anbu snarled. What the hell are you talking about? Naruto asked as his face was in the ground. Excuse me, Duncan said as he stood. What are the charges? Stay out of this, stranger. One of the Anbu barked at him as they hauled Naruto to his feet and disappeared in a mass shuntion. Duncan looked over at the girl Ayame. Where would they take him? Duncan asked. There is something wrong here and I need to find out what. Duncan thought as he paid for the meals and hurried to the tower after Ayame had told him to the interrogation chamber. I need to see Tsunade and get this cleared up. Duncan thought and cursed at the distance he'd have to cover wearing armor. XX. Duncan looked at the Hokage's tower that was surrounded by Anbu wearing an odd symbol that translated to root. He shook his head and found his way blocked. Halt. One of the root-marked Anbu said. No one is to enter the tower. Duncan studied the masked face. I need to speak with Lady Tsunade, it's important. The Anbu snorted. Leave, outsider. Duncan's eyes narrowed and he took in the eager stances by the Anbu. Very well, he said and walked away. When he got out of their sight, he pulled a charmed necklace out of his pouch and slipped it around his neck. Speaking the command word, he was covered by the one-time use spell and turned himself invisible. Time to see what is going on here. Using his years of training, he crept past the Anbu. His only close call was on the stairs, but he managed to balance himself on the rail and waited until the pair passed him by and he made to the top floor. He entered the hallway and crept along, recalling his misspent youth when his mentor had found him in the slums and taught him more than being a pickpocket. He got to the office and frowned, seeing the armed ninja and numerous counselors gathered there. The youngest man there stood with a grin. His hair reminded Duncan of a duck's backside. He looked at the gathered root and spoke. This will work. Keep her contained, and once the announcement is made, you will kill her. Lord Uchiha, what of the Kyuubi brat? One of the councilmen asked. The identified Uchiha smirked. Right now he's having his chakra sealed away permanently, and once it's announced that he's killed the 5th Hokage, when she told him that I was going to be announced as the 6th Hokage. He laughed a bit madly. And everyone that is loyal to Tsunade, more to the point those loyal to Uzumaki, are either in root-holding cells or out of the village, and by the time they come back'll be Hokage. A dangerous game you're playing, Sasuke-kun. One of the Hokage's advisors warned. Uzumaki is well liked and respected. Sasuke Uchiha snorted. The idiot couldn't lace up his boots without help. Konoha will accept me as the 6th Hokage. He smirked again. And once it's announced that Naruto is the Hokage's murderer, we'll have him released and the sheep will do the rest. Duncan saw the 2 advisors share a look, and he remembered them as the third's teammates, Kaharu and Homaru. He watched as they left, and then when the arrogant Uchiha left, leaving several guards. Duncan wasted no time as he unsheathed his sword and dagger, and the first Anbu was gutted and the second one beheaded, and their bodies were falling to the ground when Duncan's charm failed and he tore into the third guard, burying his dagger in the man's skull. He kicked open the door and found Tsunade bound and gagged on the floor with her assistant several feet away, dead. Cutting her free, he looked at her. Thank the maker that you are still alive. Tsunade had tears in her eyes as she looked at her longtime friend and first apprentice. He killed her, she whispered. He walked up behind her and slit her throat. I knew I should have killed the little bastard and ignored the council when they said he should be allowed back into the village. Tsunade was leaning against her desk. I need to gather Anbu, she said. Duncan shook his head. It looks like a silent and complete takeover. When Tsunade looked at him, he explained what he overheard. Damn it. And I sent most of them away. The earliest anyone would be back is a week's time. Tsunade sat on the edge of her desk and thought. Your best bet would be to escape Konoha and lead a revolt when you have allies around you. Duncan said. Tsunade nodded. I hate to say it, but you're right. I only hope Naruto can. Shit. Naruto. Tsunade said as she remembered Duncan's words. She grabbed her jacket. We need to rescue him. I know we aren't, she began, but Duncan held up a hand. Of course I'll help you. He loosened his blades and shifted his shoulder, wincing as it actually cracked. Tsunade grinned. Sucks getting old, doesn't it? Duncan gave her a look. Getting old. The two friends and warriors slipped out of the office, Tsunade delaying long enough to seal Shizune's body in a scroll to bury her later and to silently vow to rip the Uchiha's head off personally. XX. Underground. Duncan's sword dispatched another root Anbu and Tsunade's fist pulped another as they moved through the base. I knew Danzo had a base, and I thought that we had mapped it all, she said as they hurried towards another staircase that led them further below Konoha in a web of tunnels. They had discovered the path down as a pair of root operatives had gotten, and Tsunade cursed as she knew with her luck this wouldn't end well. 6 floors lower than the last floor they knew about originally, and Tsunade growled at the sheer number of ninja that were hidden here. 3 years and we thought we'd cut the last root cell out. Tsunade thought as Duncan was showing what a warrior of his stature can do as he chopped, slashed and bashed his way through Danzo's trained minions. I knew when that bastard died he had more than what we found. Tsunade thought as she followed Duncan, who had another root pinned to the wall, but the man bit down on a poison tooth before he could be questioned. Looks like this is where the trail ends, Duncan said as he flicked blood off his blades. Tsunade growled and with a chakra-enhanced punch blew a hole in the wall leading to another corridor that the end showed a lit room. Tsunade and Duncan rushed to the end where they found an unconscious Naruto strapped to a chair and the marks of the chakra seal fading. No. Tsunade rushed in and felt the blonde's stats. Pulse. Slow. Erratic. Tsunade looked at Duncan. Breathing. Come on baby, don't leave me. Tsunade cast several medical jutsu, several of them she invented herself. Duncan looked around, but it seemed that those that had done this had left. Tsunade was crying as she fought to heal the boy she saw as her own. Tsunade. She ignored Duncan's voice. They took away his chakra and she looked at the results her scan was giving her. They took the Kyuubi out of him. Shit, the procedure is supposed to take 3 days, how the hell? The door behind Tsunade opened. But she wasn't paying attention. Duncan was, and he put himself between Tsunade and the possible threat. Put that away. Duncan recognized Kaharu as she entered the room. Damn, we're too late, Kaharu said as she entered with a pair of ninja. Lady Tsunade. The first said, and Duncan took a moment to study the newcomers. The first was a woman with black hair and red eyes. The other was a man with long broom-like silver hair and his head protector was over his left eye. The man's eye widened seeing Naruto. We failed, he said, dropping to one knee and lowering his head. Not yet, Tsunade said as she grabbed a soldier pill and popped it in her mouth. Kaharu grabbed her wrist. What are you doing? He's dead. Tsunade shook her head. I can use the same technique Chio did when she revived Gaara. Tsunade started to form seals when Kaharu knocked her out. Duncan moved, but the village elder held up her hand. I remember you. Now listen. The jutsu that Tsunade was about to use would have cost her life. Duncan listened and lowered his sword. Kaharu looked at Kurenai and Kakashi as she addressed them. You two will need to get Tsunade to Suna. Contact everyone you can. The Uchiha is going for a takeover, and without allies Tsunade can't come back. What about Naruto? Kakashi asked. Kaharu looked at the boy. I have lived too long to see him die here, she said. She looked at Duncan. He won't be able to stay. Without chakra and without the Kyuubi he's defenseless against his enemies. Duncan looked at the blonde boy before he spoke. I can take him with me. My ship returns beyond the veil tonight. Kaharu closed her eyes and looked at Tsunade. It means he'll be safe then, so be it. Duncan thought about telling her about his concerns about the blight, but shook himself mentally. Kaharu took Tsunade's place. Once I do this, you two are to get the Godime Hokage out of here and make sure the Grey Warden gets to his ship with Naruto. Kakashi nodded. He's going to be weak after this. You look after him, Kaharu said, and Duncan gave his word. Kaharu's aged fingers sped through the seals with grace and speed that showed she might be old, but she wasn't out of the game. She put her hands on Naruto and there was a flash as her life energy sped into him. I've done all I can, Sarutobi. My debt to you is complete, old friend. You better put in a good word for me when I get there. Kaharu thought as her life slowly faded from her. Her final sight was the rise and fall of Naruto's chest as darkness claimed her. XX. Kakashi grabbed Naruto. I've got Lady Tsunade, Kurenai said as she hoisted the unconscious Hokage over her shoulder. Kakashi did the same with Naruto. Thank you, Elder. May Kami smile upon you for all you have done seen and unseen. Kakashi said as he closed the dead woman's eyes, wishing he could do more for her. Duncan pulled an object and looked at the pair of Jonin. Go. Once I throw this, the place will go up in flames. Kakashi nodded and Duncan was behind them as he tossed the firebomb and watched as the room began to burn. Kaharu's body quickly engulfed and Duncan thanked the mage he'd met who showed him how to make them. XX. The trio with the two unconscious blondes made it out of the village, meeting no opposition as everyone was gathered at the base of the Hokage Tower to watch the crowning of the new Hokage. Duncan found his horse where he left it and after getting into the saddle he looked at the pair of ninja. This is where we part ways. Kakashi didn't like surrendering Naruto to the man. He's helpless. They not only sealed his chakra away but they took the Kyuubi out of him. It would be suicide for him to stay Kakashi. Kurenai said and Duncan could see how much it hurt her to say it. Naruto needs to be away from this while the Hokage fights to reclaim Konoha. Duncan listened to the pair argue back and forth. I take Naruto with me. Tsunade knows where and how to get a hold of me when she wants him. The two ninja shared a look. Our priority is Lady Tsunade. Kakashi said with pain in his voice. He looked at Duncan. Your word that you'll keep Naruto safe until Lady Tsunade can send for him. Duncan nodded. He'd make sure that the whisker-marked blonde was as safe as possible with the blight in Ferelden. Tsunade knew but these two didn't and Duncan was desperate for any kind of aid. Kakashi helped get Naruto in the saddle before Duncan. I wish you success. Tell Tsunade. Here Duncan paused. Tell her I'll make sure Naruto comes home. Kakashi nodded once and watched as the foreigner rode away with his former student and sensei's son. I wish you well. Come back soon. The silver-haired Jonin thought and then took the burden of carrying the Hokage. The 3-day trip without supplies was going to be interesting since they knew that until they were in Suna they had no allies until they could send out the call and for that Tsunade had to be awake. With one last look where Duncan had rode away with Naruto, the two Jonin of Konoha with the unconscious Hokage fled the land of fire, vowing to return and right things as soon as possible. XX. A groan escaped Naruto as he lifted his hand which felt like it was made of jello. Finally awake, I see. Naruto opened his eyes and then closed them before he groaned at the bright light as it stabbed into his brain, reminding him of the time he went drinking for Shikamaru's bachelor party. He tried to sit up but a strong hand on his shoulder pushed him back down. Easy. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Naruto blinked his eyes to get them to focus. He saw the dark eyes and bearded face of Duncan. They captured you too, Naruto said after a moment and the sip of water Duncan gave him. No, we're on a ship bound for Ferelden. We've passed the Veil and are heading to the port in Denarum. Duncan explained everything since Naruto had been taken from the ramen stand. The blonde looked overwhelmed. Shizun's dead? He asked, sounding lost, hollow. Duncan nodded. I am sorry. But it was the best decision at the time. With you defenseless and Tsunade in exile it was. Thank you. I want to be alone for now. Naruto said. Of course. When you're up to it I will train you in another way to fight. I'll be up on deck for now. Naruto said nothing else as he lay in the bed. After the door closed a tear slipped from his eye. Damn you Sasuke. I will return one day and I'll help Grandma Tsunade kick your pail and bury next to Orochimaru. This I vow. A promise of a lifetime. Naruto clenched his hand and thought about the future and the past along with those left behind. The days aboard the ship were interesting to say the least. Naruto without his chakra sulked until Duncan asked him if he used it to fight. Thus began the lessons with the sword. Duncan looked up many times and could be heard asking the Maker for guidance and patience as Naruto had to unlearn what he knew. They did discover early on that while Naruto's chakra was gone there was residue from the Kyuubi which only seemed to work at healing Naruto, who told Duncan that it was a hell of a lot faster than before as the accidental cut on his arm vanished in less than a minute as Duncan watched it happen. Help came in the form of one of the ship's crew who used to be an assassin and had watched for several days as Duncan tried to teach Naruto his style of fighting and was failing spectacularly. He's not good with your style, the man said, running a hand through his gray hair. But we have a month yet before we reach Denarum. I can help the boy. Duncan looked at the sailor with a raised eyebrow. And how do you propose this? The man chuckled. Ninja aren't too different than I used to be. I can train the boy to fight without chakra, Granted, he won't be the best, but he'll be started on the path, and only experience will be the best teacher. Duncan looked on at Naruto, who was trying the sword stances he taught him. He sighed. Do it. XX. Silas became a very tough teacher and Naruto a very dedicated pupil. Silas said if they had the time he would make Naruto the very best, but as Duncan watched he saw the man train Naruto with throwing stars and weapons he'd gotten from the ship's hold, mostly daggers, which the blonde did better with than the borrowed longsword from Duncan. Naruto was a natural with traps and hiding, even wearing bright colors. Silas taught him to make poisons and to coat and maintain his weapons. Naruto was also a natural with archery, and by the time the ship reached the port of Danarum, Silas presented Naruto with a pair of beautifully crafted daggers, a short bow made of holly that the sailor said he got trading with the Delish, and some leather armor. It was a different Naruto that walked down the boarding ramp that had been carried aboard over a month ago. Gone was the orange and blue jumpsuit. Instead, Naruto was dressed in his new armor, and over his back was a quiver and short bow given to him by Silas. Around his waist was his belt sporting his Hittite with the leaf symbol. His hair was in a series of braids that one of the female crew did during his training with Silas after his bangs got in his face during a spar. The daggers were in special sheaths under the quiver, but were easy to draw with practice that Silas made sure he had. Adjusting the fingerless leather gloves, he looked to the side when Duncan put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Welcome to Warden, and this is the city of Danarum, the Grey Warden said. Naruto looked at the bustling port and the city beyond it. In ways it reminded him of Konoha. He saw people, merchants and travelers. He looked at Duncan. We're here to see an old friend. I'm hoping to get a recruit or two to join the Grey Wardens and help battle the Blight. Duncan explained as they left the docks and ventured into the city. We're going to the alienage to try and recruit my friend. During the month traveling from Konoha, Duncan had taught Naruto about Warden and its people. The blonde was curious about the elves, and he had long discussions into the night about how they were treated. I understand and agree with you, Duncan said when the whisker-marked blonde had been upset hearing how elves were treated as slaves or worse. Shaking his head, Naruto saw they were nearing the alienage when Duncan stopped and turned. Why don't you start getting the supplies and some extra clothes and such? He then gave Naruto a bulging sack filled with gold, silver and bronze coins that were the currency of the world he was now part of. But, Naruto started. You can join me later, Duncan said with a soft smile. Explore. Naruto looked around and nodded. Duncan was trusting him on his own, and it reminded Naruto of times with Jiraiya. All right. The blonde took the money pouch and repeated back the items Duncan wanted him to get. Naruto watched as the man entered the alienage, then turned to explore the city and find some merchants that had what he wanted. XX. The bag and backpack that Naruto bought from the mage store were bottomless, reminding him of sealing scrolls. He was enjoying his talk with a dwarf about Orzamer when he heard about a disturbance happening around the alienage. He'd met several elves who were slaves and had been shocked at their behavior, one vendor telling him that obedience was beaten into them. Naruto's knuckles had tightened at this. He hated slavery of any kind, and the more he heard about how elves were being treated, the more he wanted to slap people for their common acceptance of this. Shaking his head, he paid for the last of the supplies and slipped them into the second pack he bought for Duncan. He hurried back towards the alienage to find the massive gate closed and guards standing around. Halt. One of them barked and Naruto came within distance. No one is allowed into the alienage at this time. I need to get in there. My friend is in there. Naruto tried, but the guards laughed. You have a friend in the alienage. What's her name? The men laughed and Naruto narrowed his eyes. He walked away before he followed his first impulse and attacked them. Must not kill idiots. Duncan would be disappointed. It's Konoha all over again, except this time it's elves instead of me. He rounded the corner nearby and pulled out a pair of climbing claws that Silas had given him. After looking around, he began the climb, and it didn't take him long. It was times like this when Naruto missed having chakra and realized how for granted he took to being able to climb without gear. He reached the top of the wall and leapt over to a roof, happy that he was in the alienage. He leapt across to another roof and grunted as he nearly missed, catching his balance at the second. I really miss having chakra, Naruto muttered. On the ship it had been an annoyance, but now on dry land Naruto in the short time had truly realized how much he relied on chakra for. From something like climbing to enhancing his leaps. He was glad he still had the healing ability left over. He wasn't sure how long it would last, but it helped during his lessons with Silas. Leaping from rooftop to rooftop, he soon found everyone gathered in the square and they didn't look happy. He spotted Duncan and landed next to him in nearly a silent crouch. "What's going on?" he asked and watched as while Duncan didn't jump, however several nearby elves did. Some looked at him angrily while others looked scared. "How did you get in with the gate closed?" Duncan asked. "Climbed the wall." "Now what happened?" "It seems that the Arl's son has taken several of the women including the two brides as his bedmates." Duncan explained what had gone on and how one of the brides had tried to play peacemaker only to be knocked out in the end. "We must rescue them," Naruto said as he started to turn away. "We cannot," Duncan said. "And already the grooms have gone ahead to try and get the women back," Duncan said, putting a hand on Naruto's shoulder to stop him. "We can't get involved in this as much as we might want to. I've done what I can for them already." "What do you mean?" Naruto asked. "He armed them," another voice said. "Valandrian. This is Naruto," Duncan said. "Hello," the blonde said, nodding to the elf. "But can't we do more?" he asked. "We'd be going in blindly and it could cause more harm than good. It's best we wait. If we've heard nothing by sunrise, then we'll see what we can do," Duncan said. "If you'll excuse me, I need to calm down my people," Valandrian said before hurrying over to the group that were getting agitated and louder with their words. "Your friend?" Naruto asked. "Yes. And before you ask, he's declined joining us," Duncan said with a sigh. "You're not having much luck in recruiting, are you?" Naruto said with a soft grin as he leaned against the tree in the alienage square. Duncan shrugged. "Being a Grey Warden is a life of sacrifice and—" Naruto waved it off. "Save the spiel. You gave it to me on the ship. I said I'd join. It's something for me to do since I can't be a ninja or Hokage anymore." Duncan looked sadly at the blonde. "So sure are you?" Naruto snorted. "To be leader of a ninja village, you have to be able to have over 1,000 jutsu, which I can no longer do." Naruto looked away. "And it's obvious to all that I don't have the brains Kami gave me to look after myself. A village would burn in a month," Naruto said with a wry grin and tried to downplay his obvious pain at leaving all he knew behind. "Silas taught you things that could," Duncan began. Naruto shook his head. "He taught me things true, but what he showed me would never help me as a ruler." Naruto shrugged. "Besides, darkspawn really sound like a good avenue to vent on." Duncan watched as Naruto went about the alienage, trying to help where he could and letting the angry words of the elves wash over him. Some time later, Duncan, who was with Valandrian by the far gate, looked on. "Only if there were more men like you and your young companion," the elf elder said, "the world would be a better place for certain." Duncan agreed. "I've known him but a short time, but his heart, even with all that has happened to him, it is amazing he's so kind-hearted." Duncan watched as Naruto was trying to help some of the elves. The children were fascinated by him, but some of the more jaded adults pulled them away. Duncan saw the pain the former ninja's eyes and was about to approach him when the gate opened and the missing elves returned. Duncan saw that most of the elf women were shaking. "That one is made of sterner stuff," he noted as he recalled the bride that had tried to get him to leave after the Arl's son had made his first scene. He noted her wedding dress was covered in blood and the sword in her hand had seen some major use. Duncan saw her cousin wasn't much better, and it was then that Duncan realized that the other groom was missing. "They look like they've been through hell," Naruto said, and Duncan clenched his hand to keep himself from showing any other surprise. "His stealth is impressive," the Grey Warden thought as he looked at the whisker-marked blonde. "Let us hope that is not the case," Duncan said as they joined Valandrian and listened in as Soris speaks about he and the other groom getting into the keep and how they split up even as the pair used a nearby rain barrel to wash the blood off. "I found Kallian as she was being cornered by two guards," Soris said. He told Valandrian of their battle through the Arl's keep, and Naruto listened with half an ear as he looked at Kallian, who was talking quietly with one of the women and sent them on their way. He saw her glance at him and scowl. Not that Naruto blamed her if what happened to her what Naruto thought. "We need to get you two hidden. It won't be long before," Valandrian was saying even as the gates rumbled open. An elf ran up. "The guards are here." Kallian grabbed Soris by the arm and moved behind the elder and Duncan. Naruto's hands twitched, but a steel-covered hand from Duncan and a glance had him keep his hands away from his weapons. For now, Naruto thought as a dozen heavily armed guards marched in. I seek Valandrian, elder and administrator of the alienage. The captain of the guard growled out. Here, captain. I take it you have come in response to today's disruption. The captain looked annoyed at this. Don't play ignorant with me, elder. You will not prevent justice from being done. Justice? Naruto thought with disgust. The Jarl's son lies dead in a river of blood that runs through the entire palace. I need names and I need them now. The captain said, and it made Naruto think that the man was nearly whining to the elder. Kallian gripped Soros's arm and kept him quiet. Valandrian shook his head. I'm afraid I can't help you, captain. You know the tales that are told of the Jarl's son. I'm sure you can guess what happened. Valandrian reminded Naruto of Sarutobi when he was dealing with the council when Naruto was younger. I know that no matter what happened, it has gone too far. Your silence puts the entire alienage at risk. He turned and looked at Duncan, recognizing him for what he was. You there, Grey Warden. Tell me what you know of this night's foul deeds. Duncan shook his head. I have nothing to say, captain. And Naruto gave the man props. He kept his cool while the blonde was having a hard time and biting his tongue. I've always been hot-headed when someone is being bullied. But there isn't time for that, so I best let Duncan handle it, for now. Then I'll ask one more time. If anyone here knows who murdered the Jarl's son, speak now and save yourself a lot more trouble. The captain of the guards said, and Naruto could see Kallian with a death grip on Soros's arm to keep him in place. The captain shook his head. Very well. You leave me little choice. At that moment an elf woman stepped forward, and with his sharp hearing he heard Soris mutter, Elva. No. Stop. She did it. Her and Soris. Elva said, pointing to Kallian and Soris. Naruto's hands went to his daggers. What the hell? Why did she sell them out? The captain wasted no time. You two certainly match the descriptions we have. Guards, disarm them. He ordered. Naruto was going to fight when Duncan stepped in the way. Captain, a word if you please. What is it, Grey Warden? The situation is well under control, as you can see. The captain said, looking uneasy. Be that as it may, I hereby invoke the Grey Warden's right of conscription. I remove this woman into my custody. Kallian blinked and then looked from Duncan to Soris. What about Soris? The blonde elf finally found his voice. Please, don't leave me here. Duncan shook his head. I'm sorry, but this is not charity. The Grey Wardens need skilled fighters. To take you would be to condemn you to certain death, and I will not. Naruto wanted to argue, but he could see what Duncan was saying. While he might have fought against the Jarl's men, the danger they were heading into would be a million times worse. No, don't leave me here. Soris begged. Silence you. The captain said. Fine. You may take that one, but I ask only one thing, Grey Warden. Here the captain paused, making sure he had Duncan's full attention. Get this elf out of the city. Today. Duncan nodded. Agreed. As the captain and his men left with Soris, Naruto looked at Duncan, who was standing before Kallian. You're with me now. Say your goodbyes, and find me when you're ready. We leave immediately. He looked at Kallian sadly. I needed a Grey Warden and I found one. That conscripting your life is only circumstance. He sighed, looking weary. You did what you had to do in order to accomplish your mission. We need people like you. Shaking himself, he continued. Now quickly, say your goodbyes, your life here is over. Kallian left and Naruto understood the look she had. He had it before Jiraiya took him away from his home for the 3-year training trip. But from the sounds of it, she can never come back. Naruto. The blonde turned, realizing that Duncan had been talking him while he watched the female elf head deeper into the alienage, pausing to talk to other elves. Sorry. What did you say? Naruto gave the Grey Warden his whole attention. Is there anything you need to do? Did you get supplies enough? Duncan asked. I've got enough and spares on sleeping gear. Here. Naruto handed him a backpack and the warden an eyebrow. Naruto shrugged. Found a magic shop that had a couple of these. They can hold a lot and weigh next to nothing. He gave Duncan the leftover money. I'm getting a few other things. You wait here for me, and should our new traveling companion arrive before me, try and keep her from bolting. The last was said with a chuckle before Duncan left to get some items. Naruto sighed and sat on the steps to a raised platform. Lost in thought, he jumped at the voice that finally broke into his memories. You get conscripted too. Sorry. Kallian said as Naruto whipped to his feet and looked at her. Naruto waved the apology off and saw the sad look in Kallian's eyes. And no, I wasn't conscripted. I didn't volunteer really either. Naruto Uzumaki. He said, introducing himself. Kallian Tabris. She shook his hand. Kallian looked at the human before her. He radiated a chaotic calm different than the Warden Duncan. He said he's not conscripted, but he didn't volunteer. She thought, then shook her head. None of my business. I'm sorry we couldn't save your friend. Naruto said, and Kallian looked at him expecting a trick but saw only honesty. Sorries, and he's my cousin. She said after a moment. And I understand what the warden was saying. We're going into battle, and as much as I love him, Sorries isn't a fighter. He nearly hit me a couple of times with the borrowed crossbow. She gave a soft chuckle. I'm sure my father and Valandrian will get him out. I hope they succeed. She looked away. I'm sorry to hear about your groom as well. Naruto started, but Kallian shook her head. Nellarose was an arranged marriage. I just met him before the ceremony. Naruto saw her run a hand down her ruined gown. Truthfully, I wasn't eager to get married. Naruto saw the lie. He saw the chain around her neck along with the wedding ring, but kept his mouth shut. Where the hell is the warden? Kallian asked. Duncan said he had to get a few more supplies before we left. Naruto said. He saw over her shoulder a very battered backpack that had obviously seen better days. Also over her back was a pair of daggers along with a shortbow and a quiver full of arrows. He noticed the longsword and his head to the side. Kallian saw his look. I need to return it to Duncan. She said. The lapsed into silence and Naruto studied her once more. Her skin was pale, reminding him of Hinata. Her almond-shaped emerald green eyes sparkled with emotions he could only guess since he only just met her. Her hair reminded him of his mother's in the blood redness it had. He'd seen her dunk her head in a rain barrel to get the blood off, or attempted to. She's going to need a bath to get fully clean, the blonde thought. Kallian was using the quiet to order her thoughts and to study her new companion. His hair color wasn't something she'd ever seen before. It's so bright. Like the sun had kissed the top of his head, she thought. His blue eyes were brighter than those she'd seen in Denerim as well. The strange marks on his face made her think of whiskers. Good. You're both here. The pair turned to see Duncan approaching with a large sack over his shoulder. Are you ready? He asked Kallian, who looked back at the alienage once with an air of longing and nodded. The three exited the gate and hurried through the city. Duncan's long stride forcing the pair to jog to keep up. We're going to be on foot. Duncan said as they exited the city. We'll make camp in a bit. I want to be away from the city in case anyone tries to follow. He explained. Naruto nodded and slowed his pace to keep Kallian in front of him. I hope Duncan has something for her to wear. That dress isn't designed for traveling, he thought. He noticed she had on a pair of good boots that looked like they had been made just for her. He kept watch at their backs, pausing every so often to make sure they weren't followed. When he caught up to them, he met Duncan's look. No one's following, and I doubt that they'd find any trail we made in the dark, he told the older man. Duncan nodded as he had the fire going. I'm trusting you to teach Kallian how to make camp forage. It'll take us about a week to get to Ostagar if we keep a fast pace. Naruto nodded. Kallian, could you join us for a moment, please? Duncan said as the red-haired elf woman got up from where she was using a tree. Naruto could tell she wasn't used to the pace they set, and he had a feeling once she relaxed enough she would be asleep. Naruto is going to teach you how to make camp and some wilderness survival you'll likely need. Duncan started and she only nodded her head. I got you some gear to wear and personal items, Duncan said as he passed her the sack. Opening it, she pulled out some leather armor along with a pair of leather gloves. She also found some clean clothes, a whetstone for sharpening her blades. She found soap in there as well. At her look, Duncan chuckled. Dried blood itches, he said as an explanation. There is a stream nearby. Why don't you go and wash up and put on some clean clothes while Naruto and I prepare the meal? Standing, she started to walk in the direction where she heard running water. Pausing, she looked over her shoulder. Thank you, Warden. And then she was gone. Naruto prepared the bedrolls while Duncan made a stew. What do you think? The Grey Warden asked suddenly. Naruto paused before answering. I think she'll do fine once she's used to all the walking. Duncan motioned for him to continue. Sigh, she won't break if that's what you're asking. From the bit I talked with her I can tell she's made of sterner stuff than some of the kunoichi I know. Duncan nodded and looked at the sword she returned. Another one who doesn't prefer the longer blade. Naruto gave a snort. It's too damn big. Not all of us have your height and strength. Duncan nodded at this. I do need to see what she can do. He started. Naruto nodded in understanding. Tomorrow. She looks ready to sleep on her feet right now. Duncan chuckled. That she does, my friend. That she does. XX. Callian wept tears as she scrubbed herself raw. Hanging from a low branch was her mother's and then hers wedding dress, drying in the night air as it dripped dry. Her life had taken a twist, and for all her talk she'd never thought it would lead her here. Mom, I could really use your advice right now. The elf thought of all the things her mother had taught her had never prepared her for something like this. Naruto dove out of the way of a blade, and he did a roll before coming to his feet to see a smirking Callian standing there. Well, I think you should stick with your bow. The blonde said. You leave yourself wide open with your daggers. He said. Callian didn't look happy at his review and looked at Duncan, who nodded. Don't feel bad, I know a couple of Grey Wardens who were the same way. They were masters of any kind of blade you put in their hands, but arming them with a bow or crossbow of any kind and they'd shoot themselves in the foot or even an ally. Duncan chuckled as he checked the gear he had packed while ordering the pair to spar. His attention was drawn towards the sky when a messenger hawk dove towards him. Duncan's brow furrowed seeing the message attached to its leg. While Naruto was helping Callian with her blades, showing her the proper grips and attacks in slow motion, Duncan read the message and frowned. As if sensing his mood change, the elf and the former ninja stopped what they were doing. What's wrong? Naruto asked. I'm afraid our journey to Ostagar has been delayed. I need to be in Hyever to speak with the Earl. And then we have a long journey as we are to stop at the Tower of the Magi to see if we can get any more mages for the coming battle. Naruto shrugged. I don't mind traveling. It gives us time to learn about Ferelden and make sure Callie-chan doesn't slit my throat on accident. The last he said while avoiding a semi-playful swipe from said elf. Duncan chuckled. We'll be traveling quickly and I'm afraid you'll have to push yourself. He said to Callian, who nodded. Don't worry, I'll help her. Naruto said. Well, with that said, we should be going. We have a long journey and time is not our ally. XX. If Duncan only knew how things were going to play out. While he and his companions were traveling, events were happening around Ferelden that would give way to several allies. Not far from them, a young Delish elf was entering some ruins with his childhood friend. In Hyever, the daughter of Kuzlans was dreaming of battles her older brother was going to see as she watched the troops being prepared to head to Ostagar, while her Mibari war hound terrified the kitchen staff. In the Tower of Magi, a newly minted mage discovered her longtime friend was a blood mage and unaware of how that would change several events in Ferelden alone. In Orzammar, a dwarf noble and a casteless rogue were about to undertake a journey that neither ever thought of. And deep in the Kokari wilds, an old woman smiled as she saw it all and was preparing for the day when the Maker set it all in motion. XX. Callian growled. You need to do better. The dark spawn aren't going to stand in one place and wait for you to shoot. Naruto taunted her as he retrieved her arrows and jogged back to her and Duncan. The pace that the older warrior had set had the elf wondering if he was really mortal, as he barely seemed winded. She took aim at Naruto and the shield he was using for her target again and cursed as the blonde barely seemed winded either. It's not my fault, I've been in an alienage all my life. She thought and let fly and gave a grin as the arrow hit the wooden shield and actually knocked Naruto off his feet. Excellent shot. Duncan congratulated her. Here, put this poultice on your fingers. He said, handing her a small container. It was only then that Callian noticed that her fingers were bleeding. How? She asked. Your hands, while tough from all the work you did in the alienage, weren't used to constant abuse you've put them through the last couple of days. You should wear the gloves I got you. This got a growl from the elf as she washed the blood away and began to apply the ointment. Duncan watched the young city elf and he knew it was cruel to keep her moving like this, but the signs and portents waited for no one. Naruto stuffed her arrows back into the quiver and moved to help her wrap her fingers. Callian jerked away at the contact and tensed. Sorry, she muttered when Naruto gently took her hands and began to bandage them. I'm not bigoted like a lot of the elves in the alienage, it's just that the last human that tried to touch me, here she trailed off. It's okay. I truly understand, Naruto said as he wrapped her fingers, and Kallian figured he must have had a lot of practice. Naruto was quiet for a moment as if deciding something, then making a decision he spoke. I was born in lands far from these shores. For the longest time I knew nothing about myself, why the villagers I lived with hated me. Here Naruto sighed. I was 4 years old when I was kicked out of the orphanage, not that I got very good care there. I slept away from the other children in the damp cellar with a tattered blanket and straw for a bed. Food I was lucky if I got to eat at all, and was used as slave labor by the woman who ran the orphanage. Kallian was shocked and Duncan closed his eyes, knowing that even now the blonde was understating things if what he saw in Konoha was any indication. For the next 2 years I lived on the streets stealing food and clothes. I made a home in one of the training grounds that nobody used. Naruto finished with her left hand and started on her right. Then one day I was caught picking the pocket of someone important, someone who became precious to me. Naruto smiled fondly for a moment. I picked the pocket of the village leader, the Hokage. I thought for certain I was dead when his bodyguards, the Anbu, caught me. Kallian was unfamiliar with the terms, but she wanted to hear this more. What happened? She asked. Here Naruto laughed. He took one look at me and said, Naruto, do you know how long I've been looking for you? And ordered his guards to release me. He crouched in front of me and put his hands on my shoulder. Naruto shook his head. The old man pulled me into a hug, the first hug I can ever remember. I asked him why he was crying and he told me he wasn't sad, he was happy I was okay. Naruto paused, wrapping her fingers. He asked me why I ran away from the orphanage, and then he got pissed beyond belief when I told him they kicked me out, but it was okay because by living on the streets I at least ate twice a day instead of once a week if I was lucky. Kallian listened as Naruto told her how the Hokage got him a place to live his life in the village and his time at the academy. It wasn't until I failed the final test for the 3rd time that I learned why I was hated. I was tricked by the academy instructor Mizuki into stealing the village's forbidden scroll filled with powerful techniques. I was told if I stole the scroll and learned any of the techniques there I would pass and become a genin. Naruto snorted. I was such an idiot. Naruto told her of Iruka and his arrival, the revelation by Mizuki and his defeating the traitorous teacher and becoming a genin of Konoha. Duncan clapped his hands. You can continue this later. Break time is over and we really need to be going. Kallian realized that during Naruto's tale he had wrapped her hands, and she was amazed as she flexed her fingers. They'll be stiff tonight, Naruto said as they followed Duncan and the pace he set. We'll have to soak them in some ointment Grandma Tsunade showed me how to make and rewrap them after. Naruto said, keeping his pace with Kallian. Look at it this way, it gets easier. Kallian snorted. Great recruitment slogan. We toughen your hands and feet and all you get to eat is jerky and dry fruit. Naruto shrugged. Trail rations aren't bad. One of my friends can burn water when she tried to cook. Duncan shook his head as he kept an ear open on the two behind him and another on his surroundings. His mind was split. On one hand he was thinking about the pair behind him and blaming himself for once more bringing the young into this. The other part of his mind was on the road ahead. The army, the dark spawn horde, the blight, the archdemon, and of course the upcoming battle for Ostagar, and why no one was rallying like they should be. Listening to Naruto tell Kallian about his first mission outside the village, Duncan hoped that this wouldn't turn out the same way. Alyssa Kuzland looked back at the only home she'd known her whole life. Unashamed tears flew down her cheeks as the Grey Warden and his companions led her through the sewer. Where to now? The blonde who identified himself as Naruto asked. We'll need to stick to the woods, I fear we're in unfriendly territory right now. Duncan said. Yeah, but where to next? Naruto pressed on. Duncan sighed. I am going to visit the Delish, alone while you continue to head west. I'll catch up to you at Lake Calenhad where we'll go to the Tower of Magi. Duncan said, adjusting his pack. Naruto nodded as he recalled the map he'd studied, and Duncan continued speaking. You will wait for me at Lake Calenhad, Naruto, no going further ahead than that. The whisker-marked blonde gave a chuckle as he had been thinking of pushing ahead to the tower and seeing what mages were fully capable to do. He'd been interested since hearing stories and wondered if magic was anything like chakra. Kallian, who was standing with him, shook her head while Alyssa looked lost. Keep low. Duncan said as they exited the sewers. Alyssa looked back as they did, and against the backdrop of night the fires of her home could be seen. Come on, mourn later. Callian said, dragging the human with her as they followed Naruto and Duncan through the dark woods, the burning Kuzland home, their backdrop telling its own story. XX. On the road. It had been a day since Duncan had left them, and Alyssa Kuzland found her traveling companions odd to say the least. At her side trotted her Mabari war hound. What do you think, Rox? The dog had managed to escape after being separated from Alyssa during her search for her father. The fact the elf had nearly shot the dog when he exploded out of the brush was better left unsaid. A bark was her answer. Yeah, but the warden trusts them, and father. She closed her eyes knowing that she would never be called pup by him, a nickname he gave her when she was little and would roughhouse with her older brother. Oh maker, how am I to tell Fergus? Rox gave a soft whine and leaned his head against her leg. Who is Fergus? Alyssa jumped a foot in the air and spun around to see the whisker-marked blonde. Don't do that, she yelled. Sorry, I thought you knew I was here. Again, who is Fergus? Naruto asked as he sat on a fallen tree near her. He's my older brother, Alyssa said as she patted Rox's head. His wife and son were killed back there, as well as our parents and my sister. Where was he? Naruto asked. He left earlier in the day with the troops our father was sending to Ostagar to help the king. Alyssa said. Now I have to tell him of Arl Howe's betrayal and being the last survivor. Both Naruto turned to see Callian coming out of the brush with a couple of hares. I pulled these out of the traps you set, the elf said to Naruto. He accepted them and went to prepare them for cooking over the fire. So you two know each other long? Alyssa asked, trying to change the subject. No, Callian said. Met Callian a few days more than you, Naruto said as he skinned the hares. Rox was edging closer as Naruto put the hares on a spit over the fire. Don't even think of it. The blonde warned Teehee Mabari, who was trying to get as close as possible without moving. He gave Naruto a look. That doesn't work on me. A friend of mine had a dog companion and Akamaru was a master at the pathetic look, Naruto said as he had a kunai and was slicing up the fourth hair into strips. Alyssa watched as the blonde moved about the camp with a practiced ease, and he managed to keep an eye on Rox, who was like a statue watching the rabbits cook over the fire. You have a strange accent. Are you Orlesian? Alyssa asked finally. Naruto chuckled as he went back to the roasting hares. Never heard of it. Alyssa her head. How can you not hear of Or? He's from overseas, Callian said, deciding to end the game. The blonde had dragged her into the game, and it would have gone on for some time if Duncan hadn't taken pity on her and explained Naruto's homeland to her. Meanwhile, Naruto had sported a grin and Duncan chuckled, explaining he had a crash course on Ferelden history on the journey over and he wasn't as ignorant as he was pretending to be. Callian smiled as she recalled the arrow dodging session she had put the blonde through, and it annoyed her at how dexterous he was in avoiding her shots and laughing at her while doing it. A long way from home to join the Wardens, Alyssa said as she watched the blonde work. She knew some survival skills. Her father had made sure her and her sister could handle their own along with Fergus. Looks like I better brush up. I'm not in Highever anymore, she thought sadly. Didn't really have much choice. My village, as well, for lack of better term, is in a civil war between the advisory council and our village leader. Duncan rescued me after I was tortured near death. Grandma Tsunade sent me with him to get me out of the thick of it. I think she messed up. Ferelden, Alyssa began, but Naruto waved her off. Despite the blight and other dangers, it's better for me here. You could say I'm a lightning rod, and it's better that I am out of sight so Grandma Tsunade can rally others to her cause of reclaiming the village. Alyssa saw hurt in his eyes and was about to ask why it was better when Callian stood with her bow in hand. We're not alone. Naruto was up and his blades drawn while Alyssa scrambled for hers. Hello in the camp, a voice called. Hello, show yourselves, Naruto called out. A pair of knights stepped further into sight. That's close enough, Naruto called out. Alyssa had her sword out and gazed at the knights. You're from Redcliffe Castle, she said, recognizing the symbol on one of the knights' shields. Aye, we're bound for Denerim at the Arliss's request. On of the knights spoke up. And what of ye? A second knight inquired. Lake Calenhad. We're meeting a friend there, Naruto said. Lake Calenhad. Near the tower. The first knight inquired. Naruto nodded. Our friend has business with the mages before we continue on our way. Be careful around those mages, friend. They are nothing but trouble. The second knight said with a hint of disdain that Naruto usually heard when the villagers had talked about him. I'll keep that in mind. Naruto mumbled. Can we share your fire for a bit while our horses water themselves by the creek? The first knight inquired. Of course. Alyssa said, sheathing her sword. The three knights entered the camp. You elf, fetch, the second knight began to order but stopped the moment Naruto's blade was at his throat. So fast. The first knight whispered, none of them seeing Naruto move. You will keep a civil tongue in your mouth and not order my friend around as if she were your servant. The blonde said in a deadly voice, and his blue eyes had a storm-like aura about them. Of course. Sorry, Esser. The knight said, barely breathing for fear of his throat being slit. Kallian had tensed when the man started speaking to her, and she nearly released the arrow when Naruto had moved. He's so fast. Before, when he was training me, he was holding back. The third knight shook his head. I've told you before, Lance, to curb your tongue before someone removes it. He then looked at Naruto. I am Esser Reynard Guile. I ask for you to spare my subordinate. He's still learning, and I think his mother dropped him on his head as a babe. Naruto looked at the elder knight. Esser Guile, I'll leave him alive this time, but next time I'm taking his tongue should he speak to my friend like he did. Well, boy, Esser Guile said, crossing his arms. Don't you have something to say? The identified Lance mutters, and Guile reaches out and gives him a head smack. Do it properly, and remember you represent the ARL of Redcliffe. Your behavior reflects on him. I apologize. Lance bit out, and Naruto pulled his blade away. You can use the fire, he said, and retreated to where he was next to Kallian. Alyssa looked from the knights to her new companions and wondered just what she had gotten herself into. XX. Lake Kallenhad. You were rude to those knights, Alyssa said 2 days later as they were near the lake and Naruto had called a halt, spending his time working with Kallian, who had improved by leaps and bounds. They were rude to Kallian, he said back. Esser Guile apologized. Because they were forced to, Naruto said as he blocked Kallian's attacks. She'd gotten very good with the twin daggers, and Naruto knew if she was stronger, 2 swords would replace them. Alyssa had to agree to that. She had been appalled at their behavior after the apology. I guess my father was right. Elves are seen as a second-class citizen. Are you going to join in and practice, or would you like to take a nap? Alyssa looked at Naruto and realized she'd been sitting there while they'd been working. Grabbing her family sword and the family shield, she soon found herself in a 3-way melee. Watch it. When one of the elves' daggers nearly connected with her face. Are you going to be telling that to the Darkspawn as well? Kallian said as she performed a flip kick off Alyssa's shield, knocking her back. With a growl, she went for a powerful strike that Fergus had taught her, but Alyssa found her sword blocked by Naruto's own blades. Don't attack in anger. You leave yourself wide open. She looked down and saw his other blade had slipped past her shield as he tapped her armor-covered chest. They practiced for a bit longer until Rox had enough and lunged, tackling Naruto and licking him while the 2 women laughed. Yuke. Alright, that's enough, the blonde said, and wondered how he ended up being the level-headed one and leader. It is nice to work again as a team. I thought I wouldn't see anything like this again after leaving Konoha. He thought, pushing the Mabri off of him and standing. Oh no. Alyssa picked up his blades and he winced seeing them both cracked. Cheap crap, the former noble said. Naruto winced as they had been a gift from Silas after his lessons. I guess prolonged fighting wasn't good for them, he said, taking them back. You can use mine, it should hold you until we can get you something else. Naruto nodded and wrapped the cracked blades and stored them in his pack. Hopefully I'll be able to find a blacksmith that can fix them, but it shows that I'll need something more sturdy, at least daggers designed for heavy combat like the ones Kallian's using. He thought as he accepted Alyssa's dagger. It was similar to Kallian's, and Naruto thought that compared to his last daggers they were ugly. And it's still better than a kunai, he thought, still missing his ninja equipment he had grown up with. Kunai were all-purpose tools used for everything from throwing, defending, to climbing and digging. Daggers were bigger, reminding Naruto of Anbu's short swords, if not thicker. With a sigh he closed his bag. Those were of Antivon design, weren't they? Alyssa asked. Naruto gave a shrug. They were a gift from a teacher I met on the way over. Alyssa felt bad for the way she had hammered his blades with her relentless attacks. Naruto shrugged as he brightened. Come on. Duncan told me there is an inn we can wait for him at. Alyssa looked at him in disbelief, then looked at Callian, who had shouldered her quiver and pack as well. Is he for real? The elf shrugged. He just doesn't let himself get down with things that can't be changed. She said after she'd spent the time from Denerim thinking about the blonde and his mercurial behavior. Last one there sleeps on the floor. Naruto called back, and soon he was just keeping ahead of rocks as the warhound was determined not to sleep on the floor if there was a bed available. They only had certain amount of funds and multiple rooms wouldn't be very helpful until Duncan arrived. The elf and noblewoman exchanged looks for a second and raced off in pursuit. Recent losses put aside for the time being. Oh Maker, I'm going to be sick. Alyssa said as she looked at the dead Templars who had just been struck down by an escaping blood mage. Naruto was coming back with Duncan while Alyssa, Callian and Rox had agreed to wait in main hall on the first floor. They had seen the two women and the man enter the lower level, and soon after a squad of Templars form a wall with the Knight Commander and the first enchanter appearing with Naruto and Duncan. The cleric was to be taken away. It was discovered that the female mage had informed on her friend's plans to steal his phylactery, and they were attempting to capture the mage in question. They had come to the tower shortly after Duncan and a female Delish elf had arrived that morning. Alyssa had been surprised, even though she shouldn't have been, when Naruto took off after the blood mage. Jowan. His name is Jowan. But the blonde came back without him, and she noticed he was missing his dagger. Naruto? Duncan asked as the first enchanter was talking with the Knight Commander. I managed to tag him good, but he managed to escape. He used his blood to create a barrier of some kind over the door. The Templars there are working on getting rid of it. It's harder than steel. What do you mean tagged him? Duncan and Naruto turned as they were joined by the female mage, the first enchanter, and Knight Commander, as well as Callian, Alyssa and Rox. It was the Knight Commander who asked. I threw my dagger and it caught him in the shoulder. Naruto said, then grunted. And I lost another blade. Man, this sucks. Duncan patted him on the shoulder and chuckled. You were rough on equipment, my young friend, but your intentions were in the right place. I would have thrown better, but the dagger is designed bigger than a kunai and the balance threw off my aim. Naruto said, rubbing the back of his neck. Alyssa shook her head. Throwing a dagger. I've seen throwing knives by some of the merchants who used to try and get father to buy. The Kuzlin thought, and she recalled how she'd tried to throw a dagger once. They are not designed for it. For him to even hit the mage is something, especially with a moving target. She tuned back in as the Knight Commander raised his voice. She must be punished. The first enchanter shook his head. She did as I asked. I wanted to be certain of Jowan's intentions. And that's even worse. You should have told me. Gregoire growled. Naruto had wandered away, letting Duncan deal with the mages and Templars. He saw the Delish elf standing off to the side, her lavender eyes and silver hair shining in the torchlight of the tower. Hello there. I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Alyssa saw the look in the elf's eyes and wondered if she would even respond. The stories she'd heard of the Delish were that they were rude at best and hostile to humans. Or as they call us, Shems or Shemlins. Alyssa recalled some of the lessons from her youth. Lina Mahariel. The Delish elf finally responded. Did you really throw your dagger? Naruto chuckled. Yeah, not my brightest idea, but I'm used to smaller blades designed for throwing. Sadly, I didn't get to bring any with me from my homeland when Duncan rescued me. Alyssa saw the elf woman nod. Then she slung her pack off her shoulders and a moment later pulled out a pair of Delish daggers. They are Darmisu. Lida said. They are. What I mean is that I want them back in the same condition I loaned them to you. Naruto nodded as he looked at the curved blades. He noticed the sword on her back was larger than the blade he held, but of similar design, and Lida noticed his inspection and guessed his question. This is a Darmisen. She touched the hilt over her shoulder. Naruto could tell the blade meant something to her, but he could tell her recent grief was too raw to talk about with someone she just met. Thank you for the loan of the blades. I'll make sure to return them once I find something else. Naruto gave her a slight bow, then looked at Alyssa. And I'm sorry about the loss of the dagger you lent me. I'll get you another one as soon as we get somewhere they sell them. Alyssa waved it off. It was just a dagger. Don't worry about it. No, she cannot go. Warden, Naruto said as he heard Knight Commander Gregoire scream about the elf mage. They watched as Duncan put his hands on the elf's shoulders. You have no say in this. I invoke the right of conscription and take this mage into my care. Duncan said. Naruto noticed the first enchanter struggling not to smile. They watched as Gregoire stormed off with his knights and the wannabe priestess in tow. You just have to make friends everywhere we go. Naruto said as he and the others joined Duncan again. You got your recruit after all, it seems. The first enchanter said to Duncan and then looked at the mage. And you, my dear girl. You have done so much, first as an apprentice and then not even a day as a fully accredited mage. What you did. Elf lifted her eyes from where she had been looking at the floor while the Knight Commander had raged. I didn't do it for the circle. I did it for you, first enchanter. You have been my mentor and like a father to me ever since I was little. Naria. First enchanter Irving said, affection in his voice. He looked at Duncan. You will look after her, won't you? Duncan smiled. If I don't, you can bet the others with me will. He said, the last looking at Naruto, who nodded. I will get my things then. The now identified Naria said. Naruto could see the sadness in her almond-shaped eyes and he knew how hard it was to leave all you knew behind. She took several steps then stopped. Oh, you best take this back to the repository. She extended a blackened staff towards the first enchanter. You keep it, dear one. I hope it helps you more than it did its last wielder. Naria clutched the staff to her and then she lunged and hugged the first enchanter. I will miss you, she said, her eyes swimming with tears. And I, you child, Irving said as he hugged her. When she was released, she hurried off to gather her things. Naruto had studied her and noticed with Naria joining them there were now 3 elves in their little group. Her raven black hair had hung to her shoulders with a single braid dangling by her left ear. Her eyes were black and the tattoo on the right side of her face had gone down to her neck and was hidden by her robes. If they went further, who could say? Shaking his head, he had noticed that Lina had tattoos as well on her face, neck and arms. Noticing his studying glance, she held up her right arm. I don't know if other elves outside of the Delish use this method, but our tattoos tell our history. Naruto studied the pattern on her arm. It consisted of vines and he could make out symbols, but he didn't know what they meant. He saw the pattern go up her neck and there was a light set of tattoos on her face following her hairline over her forehead like a tiara down the other side. Lina could tell he wanted to ask, but he was keeping quiet, which she found odd as the few shems she'd met never could keep quiet. That didn't take her long. Naruto and the others turned at Duncan's voice to see Naria coming towards them with a pack and wearing a set of gold and green robes. Her new staff clutched in her hand. Irving, who had slipped away, returned as well and handed her a pouch and something wrapped in a bundle of cloth, most likely a book from the shape. Stick close to Duncan, Irving was saying. Then he looked at Duncan. Where will you go now? Up the Frostback Mountains to Orzamer. I need to inform King Endron of the coming blight. Irving nodded. I am sorry we aren't able to help more. Between the Chantry and the Templars. Duncan waved a hand. I understand. I just hope it doesn't do more harm than good. I hope you have clear skies and open roads. I wish I could go with you. Irving said as he led them to the main door where they had been chipped open by Templars with axes and the debris was being cleared away. Safe journey, Irving said. Naruto, last to leave, saw Naria hesitate. She looked at him. I've never been outside the tower since I was left here as a baby, she said softly. Naruto put a hand on her shoulder. You'll be fine, he said, and looking back he saw Irving watching them until the doors closed with a loud thud. Deciding to keep Naria focused on something, he asked the first of his million questions about magic that he'd been holding in since he heard about magic. So, you're a mage? He started. Where does magic come from? Naria had the wide-eyed look and stuttered to answer, making Naruto think of Hinata when they were younger. If she had white eyes, I'd swear she could be a mirror of Hinata, well, minus the tattoo and pointy ears, and a bigger chest. Mentally he gave a giggle as they boarded the boat to take them across the lake where they would continue onto the dwarven kingdom of Orzamer. Kallian kept looking over her shoulder to see Naruto chatting with their newest companion. She had to admit, the blonde had a way about him. Does he ever shut up? Kallian looked at Lina, who was next to her. The delish came off a bit cold, but Kallian figured it was a defense mechanism. Like I used to. Smiling, she shrugged. You get used to it. Lina muttered something in Delish and Callian realized how different a city elf such as herself was from her forest cousin. She looked back and saw the circle-raised elf and how she was wide-eyed as Naruto was describing something to her and animated with gestures. It is endearing, she thought. Naria had stopped at the docks and was looking at the water. Hey, come on, Naruto said. We're leaving. Naria looked at the water, her eyes large. They say Lake Calenhad eats mages. Naruto gave her a strange look. It's just water, see? He said, reaching down and splashing the water back and forth and getting the elf mage to leap back in fright. It's just water. Naruto said again. It's dirty, but it's still water. Naria shook her head and explained the centuries of failed spells and experiments being dumped from the tower. Naruto scrunched his nose up as she told how the Templars used the lake as a dumping ground. That's disgusting, but still it's not the lake's fault. Come on. Get in the boat. I promise I won't rock it. Alyssa, who heard that, snorted. Yeah, he did that on the way over, nearly capsized us. Rox gave a bark of agreement with his human. Duncan chuckled as he allowed himself to enjoy these days knowing that the time ahead would be filled with less laughter and more serious matters. He closed his eyes knowing that the dreams weren't wrong. I just hope I can keep my promises before I take my walk in the deep roads, he thought, looking at the young people knowing that the future lay in their hands. Ready or not, I pray I get to prepare them for what is to come, he thought as he watched Naruto help the mage into the boat. Something bothering you, Naruto? The whisker-marked blonde looked at Duncan. I'm just wondering why you split us up is all. Duncan stopped and looked the blonde in the eyes. We are going to the dwarven kingdom of Orzamer. The journey will be strenuous mountain paths and I wanted to check the darkspawn in the deep roads. The others weren't ready for that experience. And I am? Naruto asked. Duncan chuckled. You are more than ready. It was fortunate that we ran into some of my fellow wardens on the road. They will make sure that the others get to Ostagar and prepared. Van Dyne will watch over them, I can assure you. Naruto had to admit that only Lina had faced darkspawn out of his new companions, and she was used to the rigors of travel and combat. Alyssa, while trained, had admitted she was pampered by her father and brother whenever they had left, however. And Rex's boundless energy, while admirable, couldn't or more to the point wouldn't be parted from his mistress. Mabari were like that. Callian had skills she'd learned from her mother but had never been outside the Denerim alienage until her exile and was worn down by the rigors of traveling. And then there is poor Naria. Naruto thought of the elf mage. The few days on the road away from the circle tower had been hard on the elf who since she had been 6 hadn't been outside of the tower. You'll see them all soon, Duncan said with a warm smile from his bearded face, already guessing the blonde missed his new friends. I do hope that I might bolster the Warden ranks with some of the experienced dwarves who have faced the Darkspawn in their Deep Roads campaigns. Duncan admitted. Naruto shook his head and wondered who was going to have the bad luck to join them this time. It seems everyone who has joined us since Denerim has had a run of bad luck that put Tsunades to shame, myself included. Far away in the elemental countries, a blonde, honey-eyed woman sneezes violently. Naruto and Duncan reached the end of the road and after passing over a stone bridge enter a large cleared-out area with many stands. Stands Naruto notices are manned by many dwarves. When he asks Duncan about them, the elder man chuckles. These are merchants. Either exiled nobles who broke the law in the city or they are casteless hoping to start a new life. Duncan answered Naruto's question. Are these the warriors we're looking for? After passing the massive stone doors and guards, they enter a hall filled with statues. These are the paragons, Duncan explains. Naruto studied them and saw several dwarves, young and old, men, women and children worshipping the images set in stone. It made him think of the Hokage monument back home. Passing through a second set of doors, Naruto kept with Duncan as they were met by a group of dwarves. Grey Wardens, welcome to Orzamer, the dwarf said. Duncan gave a slight formal bow. You are just in time for the birthday of King Endron's second child and her presentation as a commander. Duncan nodded. King Endron must be very proud of his second child getting such recognition. Her celebration is in a couple of days, but there are several provings taking place and there will be one held in your honor as well. The dwarf said. Why is that? Naruto asked. Duncan gave a chuckle. The dwarves respect the Grey Wardens and understand our battles with the Darkspawn in ways that none of the surface races never will or could. By holding a proving they are honoring the wardens by showing us their own skills. Naruto thought about it, and as he learned more about the provings he decided they were similar in ways to the Chunin exams, or at least the third exam, the tournament fights. Naruto followed Duncan and their dwarven escort as they were ushered into the arena. Naruto listened as dwarves talked about the competitors. He was off to the side when he saw a dwarf in battered leather armor and sporting a brand on his face, his red hair in braids and a short dirty yet trimmed beard approach Duncan. Naruto felt his hand going to his borrowed blade as the dwarf's friend was watching the exchange. Naruto shook his head at how welcoming Duncan was, and the blonde knew that he had been that trusting up until he had basically been killed and exiled from Konoha. The dwarf and his friend left, heading into one of the side tunnels. What was that about? Naruto asked, smiling as Duncan turned to him. Ah, that was just a dwarf who had been dared by his friend to talk to me and ended up learning more than he had expected. Duncan said with a chuckle. Strike out while recruiting, I take it. Naruto said. Maybe. Duncan said with a thoughtful look on his face. Any further discussion was cut off when the proving master called them up and escorted them to where they could watch the battles. XX. Naruto had enjoyed the battles and had to admit that Everett, while wearing a lot of armor, was quite skilled. Or he thought so until the very drunk Everett staggered out of the waiting area. Once the fake was unmasked, Naruto recognized him as the dwarf who had spoken with Duncan before the thing had begun. He listened as those that had been cheering for him moments ago were now booing and calling for his head. Naruto heard Duncan protest and the proving master say the dwarf was casteless, and Naruto remembered Duncan's quick lesson on dwarven classes and customs. He could only watch as guards beat the casteless dwarf and haul him away. Duncan's restraining hand kept him from leaping down and putting a stop to this. I don't like it either, but it is their way. Naruto glared. It's not right. Just because of who his father was, he's marked for life. Duncan nodded and led him away. I will see what I can do for him. Naruto shook his head. Why do I feel we're about to gain another down on his luck sucker? Duncan, despite the situation, chuckled. They were led to see the king at the palace. Naruto wasn't thrilled with being underground and he kept his eyes on every dwarf, the outcome of the glory proving having left a bad taste in his mouth for dwarven culture. XX. Naruto along with Duncan had met a female dwarf who begged Duncan to save her brother, who they learned was the dwarf that had won the proving. Please, I can't lose him. Rika had begged, and Duncan had allowed the young dwarf woman to lead him back to the merchant quarter, talking about how her brother Farron had done any job that had been shoved his way by the crime boss Barrett. Farron did what he had to in order to protect me and provide for me and our mother. Naruto and Duncan left the jail when they learned that Farron wasn't there. Now what? Duncan stroked his beard. Look around. Me? Naruto asked. Duncan chuckled. You might not have your chakra, but your skills are there still. See what you can find out about this Barrett and see if you can find out about Farron. There is more to him than a simple thug in a criminal organization. You think he'd make a good warden? Don't you? Duncan asked. Rika looked at them both. We'll find your brother, dear lady. But he won't be remaining in Orzammar if we do. Rika nodded in understanding. Farron always wanted to fight Darkspawn, but due to who our father was, he was never allowed. With his skills, he'd make a fine Grey Warden. Duncan said. The elder man gave Naruto a look. Meet back at the palace at the 6th stroke of the gong. Naruto nodded, and this was one of the times he missed the technology of Konoha. Clocks or watches and short-range radios would be great at times like this, he thought as he watched Duncan lead the red-haired female dwarf away. Well, let's check with the dusters, as the dwarves call them, or casteless. He muttered, heading off towards the ruins south. XX. Naruto entered the room to find Duncan waiting for him. What happened to you? Duncan asked. Naruto sat on a nearby chair and winced. Seems people don't like to talk about Barrett. They get downright threatening. Duncan went to get some health poultices. Don't bother. I still heal quickly still. Duncan looked at the blonde in concern. What happened? I was asking around about Barrett and your missing potential recruit. Let me say, people here aren't very friendly. Naruto sighed. Well, I found a couple of casteless willing to talk for some silver, and after they told me where I might find Barrett, I was jumped by a couple of mercenaries who swore I'd never get near him. I learned that there are tunnels running beneath Orzammar that the crooks use, and felt it would be best if I got some help before taking on a whole criminal organization all by myself. Duncan nodded and went to put his armor on. Naruto put on a fresh shirt and slipped his armor over it. Duncan, he said, and when the older man looked at him he asked, "Are you sure you want this Farron character? Everything I've learned about him, well, he's not a nice person. He's a thief, a liar, and more than one dwarf told me he's quick with his knife. And he would do well as a warden. Remember, Naruto, whatever it takes. The wardens aren't made up of saints. We do the tasks no one else will or can do." Naruto nodded, grabbing the rest of his gear. "Then we better hurry. I've found out a place we can enter the lair of Barrett, but it looked like the city guard or stirred up something fierce." The pair left the palace, neither seeing Rika following with concern in her eyes. XX. They literally ran into Farron Broska coming out of the shop in the merchant quarters covered in blood and his friend looking the worse. Sadly, the city guard was there as well. They learned Farron had killed Barrett when the crime boss had threatened his sister Rika, who had come forward but was stopped from hugging her brother by the fact he was covered in blood. The captain of the guard wanted to take Farron in right away and execute him for his earlier transgression of pretending to be Everett. Duncan had used the right of conscription and Farron was to become a Grey Warden. "Get this filth out of Orzamer," the captain said, leading his men away. Farron talked with his sister and his friend, both convinced him it was for the best. "We'll be staying a couple more days before we head into the deep roads," Duncan said. Lesk shook his friend's hand and wished him well before scurrying off to Dust Town and out of sight of the city guards who were looking at the Grey Wardens and their newest recruit. "You'll have to be escorted by myself or Naruto while we're in Orzamer," Duncan was saying. Rika clutched her brother's arm and her eyes begged with him. "That's fine, Warden," Farron said in a tired voice. "And until we head to the deep roads we'll need your blades as well." Farron looked at the longsword and dagger he'd picked up and nodded. "I need to get some more supplies," Naruto said. "I'll meet you back at the palace." The pair of dwarves and the senior warden watched the blonde scamper off. XX. It was days later when Naruto and Farron were with Duncan and another pair of wardens who had arrived earlier in the day were admitted to see the king. "So we're here to watch some princess get announced as a commander?" Naruto asked. Duncan nodded. "It's more than that. It's King Endron's daughter's 18th birthday as well. It's her special day." Naruto wasn't sure what was going on. He'd explored the Diamond Quarter earlier as merchants were setting up booths. Farron had been with him when he'd bought a couple of new blades. "What's wrong with the one ya got?" the dwarf rogue had asked. "It belongs to a friend and I need to replace a dagger for another friend that I lost before we came here. Besides, having spare blades is never a bad thing." Farron had watched as Naruto bought 5 daggers. "Why not a sword?" Naruto shrugged. "I'm more comfortable with smaller blades." "You prefer daggers and that axe," the blonde said, gesturing to the dwarf's own weapons which he had given back to him once they were out of the palace and had to take back before they returned. And now they stood before the king as he was listening to arguing between several dwarven nobles. It wasn't long before a female dwarf in ceremonial armor entered with another dwarf. "That is Sarita Iduken's second child of the king and soon to be the newest commander," the warden next to him whispered. Naruto remembered his name as Pasha and he favored the longbow. "And the dwarf with her? Her second in command and bodyguard," Pasha said in the same low whisper. They watched as Sarita was stopped by a noble and after a bit of talking she broke away. Before she got to them she was stopped by a female noble and after an exchange of words Sarita didn't look happy. "Lady Iduken," Duncan said and Naruto followed his example, bowing to the female dwarf. "Warden, I wasn't aware you were joining us on our expedition tomorrow," Sarita said after exchanging pleasantries. "We'll be scouting different tunnels, but your father felt we could at least begin at the same point as a show of force." Duncan said smoothly. "Well, good hunting to you and your fellow wardens," Sarita said. "Ah, and here's my daughter." The king's voice cut into the conversations. The pair of nobles who had been presenting their argument to the king fell silent. The princess stepped before the throne and bowed. "Are you done with entertaining the masses at the proving held in your honor?" the king inquired with a chuckle. The princess gave a grin. "Who better than I, father? None of those fools deserved my attention and by defeating them I allowed them to see that they were not worthy of my attention." The king chuckled. "So like your mother." Sarita bowed her head. "Are you ready to accept your commission?" the king asked. Naruto watched as the princess was presented to the gathered nobles, and when one spoke up asking her a question about the surface dwarves, he watched as she argued with him, and next thing he knew they were heading to the proving grounds and watched as the princess destroyed the dwarf's son in an honor proving, which was literally a death match. Now that's a girl who knows how to handle a blade. Farron said, standing next to Naruto as the princess rammed a dagger through her opponent's chest and then beheaded him with a backhanded swing of her sword. Naruto nudged him. A bit out of your reach. Farron nodded. Sides be gone soon. He said, not taking his eyes off the female dwarf who was cleaning her blades and bowing before her father, who patted the now grieving father's shoulder for his loss. The return to the palace was quick, and the rest of the ceremony and following dinner went without issue or more bloodshed. Hey Farron, Naruto asked later that night. What? Before we head out tomorrow, do you want to see your sister or friend? Farron was quiet for a bit and Naruto thought he had fallen asleep. No. It's best for Rika if I just go. And Leska's probably in some hole hiding, until the guard calmed down. Sleep did not come easy, as both were nervous about the journey into the deep roads tomorrow. XX. Deep roads. No. This isn't creepy at all. Naruto muttered as they took numerous twists and turns. Pasha and the other wardens were on guard and Naruto had been told to stick close by. The illumination from oil torches and even some of the lava streams gave the place a shadowed look that was very creepy. My first time out here, Farron said as he kept his shield ready. He had accepted it from one of the wardens who showed him some tricks. His axe was strapped to his back. Leska and I used to talk about heading out here and showing the nobles of the warrior caste that a couple of Dust Town casteless could do. Farron gave a chuckle. Personally, I prefer wide open spaces. Naruto said. Down here it's easy to get turned around. There is no sun, no stars. You surface dwellers. By the stone, how can you stand not having stone over your heads? I heard that you can fall up and never stop. Naruto smirked. Oh, nobody's told you. Told me what? Farron asked. Well, there's a special plant you need to chew on. It'll keep you grounded. Around them the other wardens smirked. They had fallen prey to Farron's joke earlier when he got them to eat moss. A plant. Yeah, it has special properties that keep you connected to the dirt. Naruto. Duncan warned. He has to know Duncan. It wouldn't be fair to keep it from him. Naruto said, and the senior warden groaned and turned away. Don't worry Farron, I have some on me. Naruto said. And you just chew on these leaves? The dwarf commoner asked. Well, Naruto said, and the other wardens looked away to keep their laughter to themselves. XX. Damn you to the stone, you nug humper. Naruto laughed as Farron was squatting behind some rocks. Don't forget to wipe when you're done. The blonde called as he looked around the cavern they were currently camped in. They had encountered some giant spiders and things that were called deep stalkers, little bipedal lizards that had seemed to come out of the solid rock. The herb Naruto had gotten the dwarf to take caused diarrhea. Naruto had given him enough for a short time, but it had forced Duncan to order camp until it passed. The elder warden had not been amused. There is a serious lack of darkspawn down here. One of the wardens said. We know that means they are assembling. Another said. How can you tell? Naruto asked. These tunnels we're in, they should be crowded with the buggers. Arthur, a former knight, said as he sharpened his sword. We're miles away from Orzamer and have seen only a small handful of darkspawn. You mean the spiders, stalkers, and what were those things? Naruto looked at Arthur. Shriekers. The knight said. Right. Those aren't darkspawn. No, but they are foul evil creatures that survive in dark places. Naruto sighed and then smiled as Farron joined them by the fire. Everything come out all right. Naruto grinned and the dwarf glared. XX. It was several days later and they were nearing an exit that would be in the Frostback Mountains south of Orzamer's when they were come upon by a very unlikely encounter. A female dwarf staggered out of a side tunnel in clothes carrying a sword and shield. Naruto blinked. Lady Iduken. His call had gotten the attention of the other wardens and Duncan, who had been looking over a map. Milady. Duncan was surprised as he got his canteen and ordered for some bandages and the mage to come up. Joss the mage was already there and tending to the wounds. Her bare feet were bleeding and her leg was sporting a wound like she had caught in a leg hold trap. She was filthy, covered in blood and gore. Milady, what are you doing out here alone? Duncan asked. Where are your guards? Sarita accepted the water and after guzzling it down as the mage tended to her wounds. I am Lady Iduken no longer. She said, accepting another canteen of water and drinking it down. Why not? One of the other wardens asked. You don't have to answer that. Duncan told her. My younger brother is very good at plotting, it seems. He got me framed for killing our older brother. He manipulated everyone. She said the last softly. Hey, the princess is now a pauper. Farron chuckled and the noble looked at the commoner. She looked away. I guess I am. You are welcome to join us. Duncan said to her. You mean become a Grey Warden? Sarita asked for clarification. She looked back over her shoulder, a look of longing in her eyes. A look that Naruto knew very well. You are very skilled, milady. To make it through all these tunnels armed with a sword and shield with no armor speaks greatly of you skills. Duncan said as Joss finished his task. I'm afraid there will be some scars. The mage said softly. Sarita shrugged. I'm not vain. Scars tell a warrior's life. What would you know, you pampered princess? Farron growled. Sarita ignored him and looked at Duncan. I will join you. There is nothing left for me here, and you said there are darkspawn to be fought. They made ready to leave, and Naruto had managed to scavenge some leather armor and boots for Sarita. We'll have to get you something more once we get somewhere safer. He told her after adjusting and cutting notches in straps so they could be adjusted to fit her smaller frame. Farron had been prowling around. Every so often he shoot the other dwarf a dark look. This way. Duncan called out. You remember the way then? Naruto asked. No, but the air smells less foul this way. Duncan said, and the blonde shook his head, wondering if following the wardens was going to get him killed. I can't die. I need to get back to Grandma Tsunade. He thought as he followed the other wardens walking between the two dwarves to act as peacekeeper. XX. Elemental Nations. Konoha. Get the fire teams into position. Tsunade called out. She had gathered allies, many ninja in Konoha that were loyal to her and to Naruto. We can't let the traitors escape in the confusion. I will make sure of that. A very monotone voice said as Gaara joined the war council. Tsunade looked at the former Jinchuriki of the one-tailed sand demon and nodded. Hinata. She called out. I'll need you on lookout. The former Hyuga princess nodded. Sasuke Uchiha will pay. Tsunade said. And those that aided him in this. Hinata's eyes narrowed. And then Naruto-kun can come home. Tsunade looked towards the horizon. He better be safe, Duncan. She thought and didn't answer Hinata's question. Her mind kept seeing the blonde mostly dead when they found him, and she vowed Kaharu's sacrifice would not be forgotten. Kakashi, I have a mission for you. She said instead. She just hoped that the information they'd found in a hit-and-run raid would be useful to help Naruto. Naruto had gotten used to traveling with Duncan and the wardens they had met and traveled the deep roads. He watched over the dwarves who, while fit, had a few issues with surface travel and were on edge at every creature that crawled or flew, but the older wardens dealt with them, leaving Naruto time to train. He had his new blades as well as spares, and he planned on returning the Delish elf her blade when they met again. And I have Alyssa's replacement as well. He thought, still feeling bad at losing the female Kuzlin's dagger. He had also picked up a pair of daggers for Kallian, knowing the city elf preferred the shorter blades as she had fought well with her borrowed long blade, but the shorter blades became extension of herself. Naruto wondered how she would do with Kunai and once more missed his home. He hadn't been sure what to get for Neria as the mage hadn't really opened up too much, but he had found a necklace that sported a minor enchantment that would give her a minor boost in her magic, or that's what the dwarf who sold it to him had told him. Naruto thought of the journal he had started keeping and wondered if any of his friends back in Konoha would believe all he'd seen since he was rescued. You okay, Naruto? The whisker-marked blonde turned to see Duncan and wondered how the older man could move as quietly as he did wearing his armor. Everything that's happened and about my friends back in Konoha. He answered. Duncan nodded. I know that it's all new to you and your way of life has taken a drastic change. Once you become a Grey Warden, your life will be dedicated to sacrifice. Naruto snorted. Need I remind you I was a Jinchuriki? A human sacrifice. Duncan nodded at this. So you still won't tell me about the joining? Naruto asked, and Duncan shook his head. I can't. The warden started to say, but Naruto waved him off. Yeah. Anyway, other than the darkspawn, anything more you can tell me what we'll face? Duncan shrugged. The various breeds of darkspawn, tainted creatures, and the archdemon, which should be handled by the senior wardens. Naruto shook his head. And you and the king believe they'll rise down in the south when Orzamer to the north would be a more likely avenue. Our scouts report seeing large groups coming above ground to the south in the wilds. There have been several clashes between the king's men and the Darkspawn there already. The Tevinter Imperium in the old days originally used Ostagar to fight off the barbarian hordes. It is oddly fitting that we use it now to stop the Darkspawn. Duncan said, and they were distracted as Farron was yelling about an attack, and they turned to see a deer get startled and race away, the wardens around the dwarf commoner chuckling and explaining about the creature to the dwarves. Naruto. Don't worry, Duncan, I know. The words falling into silence with the senior warden thinking about helping the blonde after Ostagar and the end of the blight. XX. Ostagar. They were entering the ruins of Ostagar as the sun was nearing the horizon, introducing the end of the day. They were waved through the guard stationed at the gate, who gave them a quick rundown of the camp's layout. There are only a handful of wardens in Ferelden at the moment, and all of us are now gathered here, and it is this blight must be stopped. Here and now. If it spreads to the north, Ferelden will fall. Duncan was speaking to Naruto and the dwarves. Their entrance into the ruins was stopped by blonde man wearing gold armor, a two-handed sword, and was followed by a dozen guards. Ho there, Duncan. The armored blonde called out and extended and clasped forearms with Duncan. King Callian. Duncan said in surprise. I didn't expect a royal welcome. Callian said with a smirk and a knowing look. I was beginning to worry you'd miss all of the fun. Duncan shook his head after releasing the king's forearm. Not if I could help it, your majesty. Then I'll have the mighty Duncan at my side after all. The king said as Duncan stood at his side. It will be glorious. The king had a look in his eyes that had Naruto flashing back to his youth with tales of battle in his head before he'd ever been in a battle. The other wardens said you had a promising recruit along with the ones you already sent ahead. The king said, and Naruto found the king and Duncan looking at him. Naruto noticed the dwarves had used their lack of height to hide behind the other wardens. Bastards. The whisker-marked blonde thought as he realized he'd been left at the forefront and the king's attention. Allow me to introduce you, your majesty. Duncan said, but the king waved him off. No need to be so formal, Duncan. We'll be shedding blood together after all. The king stepped in front of Naruto. Ho there, friend. Might I know your name? It's usually bad manner to ask someone's name without introducing yourself. Naruto said, and he saw Duncan wince and the king's guard tense. The king chuckled. You are right, of course. Callian Theron. He said proudly. Naruto Uzumaki, from Konohagakure, the village hidden in the leaf. Naruto said and gave respectful bow. Callian looked thoughtful. I don't recall such a place in Ferelden. Are you from Orlais? Konoha is across the sea, your majesty. Duncan said as Callian nodded. Well, I am pleased to meet you. The Grey Wardens are desperate to bolster their numbers, and I for one am glad to help them. Naruto knew that right then and there the king had not seen combat as he had the starry-eyed look Naruto had seen in himself and later Konohamaru. I would like to learn more of your culture later, and if Duncan found you, then you must have some skills that will help in the coming battle. Naruto gave a slight bow of his head. Of course I will do my best, your majesty. Your abilities are of course above those of others, as the Grey Wardens wouldn't have gone out of their way to recruit you. Allow me to be the first to welcome you to Ostagar. The wardens will benefit greatly with you and the other recruits joining their ranks. Naruto mentally shook his head. You're too kind, your majesty. One of the guards cleared his throat and Callian looked sheepish. I hate to cut this short, but I should get back to my tent. Loghain can't wait to bore me with lectures and strategies. Duncan cleared his throat and Naruto used this opportunity to step back. You're too kind, your majesty. Farron said in a mocking voice, only to get punched in the back of the head by Sarita. Stow it, Nug for brains. The former Lady Idukan said in a low growl. Duncan and the king were walking, Duncan telling him about Red Cliff forces being there in a week and the king raising his doubts about this being a blight and Duncan's assurances it was. I really must be going before Loghain sends out a search party. Farewell, Grey Wardens. Naruto and the others bowed as the king and his honor guard crossed the bridge, leaving Duncan and them other far side. Duncan looked at Naruto and the dwarves, motioning the other wardens ahead. What the king says is true. They've had several skirmishes with the Darkspawn and won those. Naruto looked at where the king had gone. He sounds like he's not taking the Darkspawn seriously. Not very bright. Farron said, spitting on the ground. Even a small raiding party is dangerous. They learn quickly. Sarita said. Darkspawn will sacrifice hundreds just to test the defenses. The Idukan said, adjusting her shield. To discount them easily makes him a fool. Kallian is no fool. He sighed. And despite each victory, the horde is growing every day. Duncan motioned for them and they started walking towards the bridge. They outnumber us greatly. I know there is an archdemon behind this, yet I cannot ask the king to act solely on my feelings. They stopped at the bridge, Duncan facing the three of them. Why not? He seems to hold you and the Grey Wardens in high regard. Sarita said. Duncan sighed and looked to the horizon. Yet not enough to wait for reinforcements from the Grey Wardens of Orlais. Here Duncan gave a mirthless chuckle. He believe our legend alone makes him invulnerable. Duncan looked at the three recruits. Our numbers in Ferelden are too few. We must do what we can and look to Tairn Loghain to make up the difference. Duncan put a hand on Naruto's and Sarita's shoulders. It is to that end that we should proceed with the joining ritual without delay. XX. Duncan left them at the bridge as he had preparations to make, telling them to seek out Alistair and the others and to join him near his tent after they've had time to look around the camp and get fresh weapons and armor. Ye notice we've been left alone, the three who have never been here, two of us never to the surface before. Farron said as he stomped along Naruto, Sarita on the ninja's other side. We'll figure it out, Naruto said as they climbed the stairs to the campsite of the bridge. Naruto got to the top step and his only warning was a bark and he was tackled back down the stairs. Rocks. A female voice yelled. The two dwarves got their first look at Amabari and thought the blonde was under attack. Naruto meanwhile was laying on the ground, pinned under the warhound who was licking him. Rocks. Get off of him. The dwarves saw the woman in worn clothes rush up and grab the dog by the collar and pull. Naruto pushed and between the two of them managed to get the dog off of Naruto, who stood wiping his face free of dog saliva. Sorry about that, Alyssa Kuzlin said, giving the whisker-marked blonde a grin with her apology. Naruto, still wiping dog slobber, growled, I bet. Alyssa looked at her warhound. Sit. Rocks did, but his eyes were on the blonde he had tackled. What the name of the paragons is that beast? Farron demanded. It's a Mabari, a very loyal and deadly warhound. You can't go anywhere around Ferelden without seeing them, Alyssa said, studying the dwarves before looking at Naruto. Two more strays. Yup. Naruto giving up on the slobber, and like the rest of us they have a story, which they can tell you later. Alyssa nodded and Naruto noticed she wasn't in her armor or armed. You guys get here all right? Yeah. Arriving in the company of a group of Grey Wardens is nearly a guarantee for a warm welcome. Come on, I'll show you where we set up. Naruto followed Alyssa. So did you find your brother? He asked. No, the has been out with a scouting party this whole time. Alyssa said in a huff. The others doing okay? Naruto asked as they walked past where the Circle of Magi had set up a group of Templars keeping people away from the gathered mages who were casting a big spell. Oh, they're fine. Kallian and Lina nearly beat the quartermaster to death when he started barking orders at them. Alyssa said with a chuckle as she described the encounter to Naruto. Idiots and bigots. The blonde muttered. And Neria? He inquired about the mage. See for yourself. Alyssa said, and ahead they found the elf mage talking to an old woman in mage robes. Hey Neria, look who Rocks found. Alyssa called out and the Mabari gave a proud bark and puffed up with pride. The elf mage turned at the calling of her name and her face lit up as she smiled brightly. Naruto. She yelled and said something to the old woman before running towards the group. This time Naruto was braced as the slender elf slammed into him in a tight hug. Finally, the slender elf said as she hugged the blonde who had been her first friend outside of the tower. Naruto chuckled, glad to see the mage opening up. You would think you missed me. He teased and smiled as the elf blushed to the tips of her ears. Are all surface dwellers as touchy-feely as you? Farron asked. No. Naruto said and made the introductions. So, Lady Idukan, how are you finding the surface thus far? Neria asked. Confusing. And vast. Sarita. I kind of understand. Since I was a child I've been locked away in the Circle's tower at Lake Calenhad. Hem. A polite cough interrupted them. Neria blushed. Oh, I'm so sorry, Win. The elf said to the old woman. We were talking about the Darkspawn and the Black City and the Fade. The old woman identified as Win waved a hand. Don't worry about it, dearie. I understand completely. She looked at Naruto and the dwarves. And even more Grey Warden recruits. If Duncan keeps this up, he'll build up the Wardens to their former glory before we even see the Archdemon. Win ended with a chuckle. Neria made the introductions quickly. Win was one of my teachers in the tower. Now you're making me sound like an old fuddy-duddy. Now I need to check in. There are still preparations to make before the battle. The group watched the older mage walk away. Naruto shook his head as he felt that while she was old, he had a feeling she was as tough as Tsunade. Neria took his arm. Come, see the tents. Naruto was dragged as the elf started talking about all she'd seen since arriving at Ostagar. They were passing the kennels when she stopped. What's wrong? Naruto asked. Alyssa and Rox stopped as well, and Rox whined at the fenced-in area. They are going to lose another one. The elf mage said sadly. Naruto looked over the fence and saw several Mabari. One was separate from the others, looking ill. What's wrong with them? Darkspawn blood. Sarita said after taking a look. It's corrupting them. The dwarf is right. A voice said. They all turned to see the kennel master approaching. His owner died in the last battle and the poor thing ingested darkspawn blood. He looked at them. The new wardens you've been waiting for? He asked Neria, who nodded. I could use your help. I have some medicine that might help, but I can't hold him and administer it at the same time. If you could muzzle him. Why don't ye muzzle him yourself? Farron asked as he eyed the war hound. You're a Grey Warden, or soon will be. All wardens are immune to the taint. The most you'll have to worry about is some teeth marks. Neria stepped up, but Naruto held her back. Give me the muzzle. Naruto, Alyssa said in warning while holding Rox back as the door was opened. I'll be careful, he said, stepping in and closing the gate. The sick Mabari backed away, and Naruto, who had spent time with Kiba and Akamaru, thought back to how Kiba dealt with his partner when he was sick. Hey boy, I'm not going to hurt you, he said in a soft, soothing voice, holding the muzzle at his side as he advanced slowly. The dog gave a growl. No need for that, Naruto said soothingly. You don't want to do that. The others watched as the Mabari backed up, alternating between threatening growls and whimpers of pain. I know you're not feeling well, Naruto said softly. If you let me put this on you, we can apply some medicine and make you better, Naruto said, holding up the muzzle. Naruto was within arm's reach and could see along with the pain there was intelligence. Naruto moves to put on the muzzle and the dog growls but doesn't attack as Naruto slips on the muzzle. Well done, the kennel master says as he enters with the stuff. I'd hate to have to put him down. He's from a strong breed. Naruto stroked the back of the ill dog. You get better. He left the dog and rejoined the others. That was a very good thing you did, Neria said as he rejoined them. Or stupid. That Mabari could have attacked you, Alyssa said, and Naruto could tell the Kuzland had been worried. Not going to help in the long run, Sarita said. Too much darkspawn blood and it will start to change. The kennel master rejoined them. Thank you again. If by chance you're going into the wilds, could I ask you to find a specific herb I could use to improve the dog's chances? We might be, Alyssa said. Neria got the specifics and they headed away. They got to where their tents were and Neria gestured. We set up over here. Rox stretched out near the blazing fire while Alyssa went into a tent. She came back out. Callian and Lina aren't here. They're probably at the practice area, Neria said. Or tormenting the quartermaster again, Alyssa said with an annoyed huff. Naruto helped the dwarves settle in, sharing a tent with Farron while Sarita shared with Neria. Naruto unpacked his gifts and presented them to Neria and Alyssa. He found Lina's bedroll and put her daggers there and Callian's new ones on her bedroll. Now where is the quartermaster? We need to get some armor made or adjusted properly for Sarita, Naruto said after he stashed his gear. And then we'll need to find Alistair, I think Duncan said. Alyssa groaned. Quartermaster first. Alistair. He's funny, Neria said. Alyssa grumbled. Come on. She led the dwarves while Naruto followed with Neria. Rox was ordered to stay and the dog was bribed with a meat-covered bone. XX. Sarita didn't get new armor, but at least properly adjusted. Naruto bought some health kits and a new whetstone. Farron sold a lot of the swag he had collected in the dark roads and bought himself a new pack and crossbow along with the bolts. They were leaving the quartermaster when they encountered another new recruit and watched as he was slapped hard enough to make him stagger, the irate woman walking away. What have I gotten myself into? Naruto wondered as Davith greeted them, leering at Naria, Alyssa and Sarita. Well, the old ruins just keep getting better and better. Name's Davith, by the way, as these two pretty ladies can already tell you. And we'll tell him to avoid you and watch his purse strings as well. Alyssa said, and Davith chuckled. No need to be rude. Just welcoming the new recruits. Davith said, and Naruto wondered what else was in store as Davith talked about how he wondered about the joining and why it was so hush-hush. Naruto asked him if he'd see Alistair, and Davith gestured towards some ruins. I think he was after one of those mages. Entering the ruins, they heard the sound of a raised voice, and after following it they found Alistair getting yelled at by an irate mage. Naruto had met only a handful of mages to date, and Win had been one of those he found the most pleasant. The one with Alistair he thought would benefit from one of Tsunade's 1,000-yard punches. Or a Venkakashi's 1,000 years of death. He thought as Alistair gave the mage a look, and Naruto knew he was going to give the man grief, and he didn't have to wait long as the mage left in a huff after Alistair said he'd name his child after him. The grumpy one. You know, one good thing about the blight is how it brings people together. Alistair said as he watched the mage storm away. He's awfully strange for a human. Sarita said, and Naria nodded while Farron grunted in agreement, while Elisa nodded. Naruto shook his head as Alistair noticed them. You're not the first to say that. Naruto studied Alistair and noticed the resemblance to King Kallian. I don't think it's supposed to be a compliment. Alistair grinned, then furrowed his brow. Wait, we haven't met, have we? You're not another mage, are you? Naria shrank back behind Naruto. I'm not, Naruto said. Ah, good. Less yelling at for me then, and I won't be turned into a toad. Alistair said, and the group unknowingly shared a similar thought about the mental abilities of Alistair. What is wrong with toads? Naruto thought as Alistair spotted Naria and sighed, then gave her a friendly grin to tell her he was only joking. However, the day is still young. He then looked at the group. Wait, I do know you. You're Duncan's new recruits. Alistair was friendly, and Naruto found himself wondering about the man's sanity as he talked about the Wardens, his time as a Templar for the Chantry, and the other recruits Jory and Davith. As the junior member of the Wardens, I'll accompany you as you prepare for the joining. What can you tell us about it? Sarita asked as they started to walk the camp. It's dangerous. Alistair tried. Really? They walked the camp looking on at the preparations taking place. They spotted Davith harassing another woman and get slapped again. Thatman's not Makito face Darkspawn, the women in the Campare going to castrate him before the battle begins. Naruto thought as they kept walking. Alistair shook his head at Davith's actions and led them up a ramp where they met Sir Jory, who was with a group of soldiers receiving a blessing from a sister from the Chantry. After talking with the knight, Naruto found the man to be a whiner and not very bright, making Naruto think of himself when he was a child with his beliefs of glory and battle. They passed an area littered with wounded, and Naruto bowed his head as clerics made their way around trying to ease the suffering as best they could with herbs and ointments. Be kinder to put them out of their misery. Sarita said, and she explained about the taint. They continued their tour of the camp, passing a group of men and Mabari who called themselves Ash Warriors, and the leader, after complaining about the amount of elves when he spotted Naria, gave them a brief history of how the Ash Warriors came to be and welcomed Sarita and Farron to the Grand Army of Ferelden. They passed the tents where Duncan's was near a huge bonfire, and after passing the royal tenets they found a group of archers trying to practice while Lina and Kallian were showing them how it was done. You know, a moving target would be more accurate. Naruto called out, and as one both elves turned and gave him a look. Done sightseeing? Lina asked. Kallian smiled seeing him. You know, after being around you, the humans we met since getting here have failed miserably. Naruto shrugged. I'm unique. The blonde said. Introductions were made, and the Delish Ranger looked at the two dwarves while Kallian chatted with Naruto and told him of her experiences since they split up. I hate to be the bad guy, but we should meet with Duncan so we can start the preparations for the joining. Alistair said, and as the group left, Naruto heard some of the soldiers and their comments about the elves. He mentally marked them and followed, knowing to keep an eye on his friends as it seemed the camp was full of bigots and idiots, the two going hand in hand. XX. Korkari Wilds. After getting orders from Duncan to retrieve some Darkspawn blood, enough for everyone, and to find a chest with some old treaties, the group of 10 set out. Alyssa left rocks behind with bribes of jerky and a promise from Duncan to keep an eye on the Mayberry. Kallian, Lina and Davith followed with Naria, who was guarded by Farron while the others spread out around them. Not far from the gates the group was attacked by wolves, which is put down in a hail of arrows, a couple of spells, and those that got close died at the blades. Naruto looked at Jori and shook his head after the last wolf went down. You know, with how you swing that blade, you're a menace to us as well as the Darkspawn. I beg your pardon. The knight asks in a tone that really made Naruto think of Ebisu. The others look on as Naruto faces the knight. Beg all you want. You and that great sword of yours is nothing if not dangerous to allies and enemies alike. You nearly took off Alyssa's head swinging that sword around. The female Kuzland had dropped to the ground to avoid having her head taken off, and if Naruto hadn't been there, a wolf would have ripped out her throat while she was down. I am a knight of Hyever and Redcliffe, and I'll have you know. Save it, Naruto said as he knocked the blade from the knight's hands and shoved a longsword into them that he'd found near a dead body of a soldier that obviously hadn't made it far on his patrol, and the wolves were feeding off of the remains. What are you doing? Jori asked as he fumbled with the smaller blade. Until you can use that, you won't be getting to use this. Naruto pointed at the large blade on the ground. Jori whined as Naruto picked it up and shouldered the large blade. You can carry it, but if you draw it, I will personally shove it up your. Naruto stepped away, pissed as Jori waved that huge blade around and nearly killed those on his side in his eagerness to kill a couple of wolves. What would Hedonklou sign fighting? Naruto thought and shuddered as he pictured the great sword carving into his ally's flesh. Naruto had seen great swords in action, and Jori was a child in ability compared to Zabuza and Kisame. The others followed as Naruto followed the trail of dead wolves to a body that was floating in a small lake. He frowned as he fished it out. What are you doing? Davith asked as he looked around nervously, an arrow at the ready and only needing to be pulled and released. Naruto dragged the body to the shore and started to rifle through the dead man's clothes. Gathering intel, Naruto said as Farron joined him. He saw Kallian raise her nose and look around as the ninja and thief did their grisly task. Naruto found a few coins and a sealed letter. The group left the missionary's body where they dragged it. They continued on with Naria, gathering some herbs along the way and even finding the plant needed by the kennel master back at Ostagar. They found a dying soldier, who they helped patch up, and found out his whole patrol had been wiped out by Darkspawn. After the man had left on his own back to Ostagar, it was Jori who was freaking out. Alistair stepped in and played peacekeeper with Davith while Naruto and the others searched the area and found the dead bodies of the rest of the patrol. Naruto looted the bodies, taking injury kits and coins. It was just past some ruins that they encountered their first Darkspawn. Jori charged, and it was Kallian and Lina that saved him with well-timed arrows that took down the first Hurlik as it charged, an arrow through each eye. More Darkspawn charged out of cover and the battle became one big melee. Several of the dwarven-like genlocks shot arrows at them and Naruto closed the distance. His daggers a blur as he danced amongst them while he kept an eye on Jori, who was being saved again by Alistair as the knight had left his back exposed and a genlock dropped its camouflage glamour to stab the knight in the back. Naria's spellfire was effective and soon they had taken down the Darkspawn and Alistair removed the blood from the Hurlik only. It matters on the blood source. The junior warden said as he sealed the vial and placed it in a pouch that Naruto noticed was padded on the inside. Explaining why he didn't gather any from the dead genlocks. The group continued their search, Naria adding more herbs to her pack while the dwarfs were looking around. Naruto heard Sarita wishing for the safety of stone. It's too quiet, Lina said. What? Naruto asked. No animal sounds. The Delish elf said. She had her head on a constant swivel, her mind going back to another woods and her own recent encounter with Darkspawn. They found another dead patrol, this time the bodies were hanging from a log. Alistair muttered, poor sods. And they kept going, running into more Darkspawn. Naruto growled as Jori once more charged in, and this time Davith went with him, drawing his own daggers. Idiots. Naruto muttered as he and Alyssa moved in, leaving the dwarves to cover the elves. Arrows and spellfire reached the Darkspawn before any of the fighters, and Naruto had to admit the monsters were tough as several arrows were embedded in the genlock's shoulders, and yet the short monsters fought on. Alyssa used her shield to bash the charging Hurlik Alpha, and while she blocked the wicked-looking saw-like blade, Naruto was there, his daggers digging into the armor before he back-flipped away as the Darkspawn tried to decapitate him. Alyssa was there with her shield blocking the attack. Is it me or Darkspawn eager to die? Naruto chucked as he ducked a vicious swing and drove his dagger deep into the Darkspawn's chest while Alyssa using her family's sword decapitated the Darkspawn. Naruto saw the others finish off the swarming Genlock. Alistair came over and removed blood from the headless Hurlik. XX. A couple more encounters led them towards a hilltop where Darkspawn were fighting some wolves. Naruto suggested they wait to see which group won. Sadly, Jory was charging in. Alistair gave a tired sigh as he brought up his shield and swords. Would it be wrong if we just let him run off? The resounding no got him to chuckle, and Davith was already halfway there as well. Lina drew, sighted and released an arrow. There, I helped the stupid Shem. Naruto chuckled as he joined Alistair and Farron in the charge, Alyssa and Sarita staying to protect the archers and mage. They arrived just as Jory was tackled by a Genlock who was going to shoot him at point-blank range with its crossbow. Same Genlock was tackled by a snarling wolf that sank its teeth into its neck, and the Darkspawn thrashed about as its throat was ripped out. The wolves won the battle only to be cut down by the aspiring Grey Wardens. Naruto looked at Jory, who was upset, and tossed the longsword aside and pulled the great sword from his back. What are you doing, Sir Knight? Davith asked as Naruto skinned the wolves. Farron had found another missionary's body nearby in some ruins and found a journal that spoke of a hidden cache and where to find it. I have had enough of this skulking about. There is no honor in this thieves' work. Looting the dead. For Andraste's sake there is. Naruto's kick knocked Jory out. Honor. Glory. You're an idiot and you're going to get the rest of us killed. Naruto said with a dagger in his hand. Naruto. Alistair said. I'm not going to kill him. Naruto said. He kicked the great sword aside. But he's going to learn a lesson of rushing ahead. Kallian and the others watched as Naruto made sure Jory got the message. The dwarves chuckled and Alistair looked away, trying to hide a smirk. The group knew their work in the wilds was far from finished. They had to get more blood and find the ruins that held the elusive Grey Warden papers that Duncan asked them to find. They set up camp, with Davith setting up a space for Jory once he regained consciousness. Davith at this time was the only one willing to talk or be around the whining knight. Even Alistair was at his patience end with Jory as the knight complained once he was awake again. The sun was setting and the fire gave the chilled air a hint of warmth. It was quiet, even insects were silent, and it left the group tense. Shouldn't we be heading back to Ostagar? Jory asked as they continued once the sun came up. They had broken camp and Farron suggested they check out the cache and the missionaries' camp. At the blank look he held up the letter from the first body they had looted. We still need to find the papers Duncan asked us to. Alistair said. A night of sleep had erased some of the annoyance the junior warden had, but not all of it. Lina and Naruto scouted ahead, the others losing the pair in the shadows of the swamp. They killed some more Darkspawn. Naruto, who had taken to the trees, had dropped down amidst the group of Genlock and slashed two of their throats, and Lina had put an arrow in the third one's brain before the fourth one realized it, and it turned to see the others coming around a small bog and raised its short bow only to catch an ice missile from Naria in the throat and die. You're getting rather good at this, Alistair said as they looted the bodies and those with bows shared the pilfered arrows. Farron checked the journal and the map that the missionary had sketched out. We cross those rocks there and there should be a marker of some kind. The group started to cross the moss and slime-covered rocks that made a path over the water when the howl alerted them that they weren't alone. Wolves. Naruto warned and cursed as their balance was shot on the slime-covered path. The splash alerted them that Davith had fallen in, and Alistair and Alyssa in the lead braced their shields, making a wall as the first wolf reached them. Lina launched arrows and Kallian, after getting her balance, joined in. Naria was saved from being knocked in as Jory rushed past and broke past the shields, his great sword swinging as the dwarves each grabbed a handful of rope. Jory pushing got to dry land and his great sword swung, cleaving into wolves with abandon. The arrows soon stopped as the others reached dry land. Davith crawled up on the bank, his teeth chattering in the cold. We need a fire, Alistair ordered, and Naria, using a spell, created a fire while the others gathered what they could to burn. Jory was proud of himself and Naruto was kept from saying something when Farron called him up to the statue where he saw the dwarf had already found the cache. Naruto saw the great sword and a few other items. He told Farron to bag it and the loot went into the enchanted bag of holding. Davith was wrapped in a blanket before the fire. You know there are easier ways to take a bath. Naruto said as he looked at Davith. Sir Knight knocked me into the water in his eagerness to do battle. Davith chattered through cold lips. We were sitting ducks on that bridge. Jory defended. Alistair shook his head. Davith will stay here and get dried off, and if he can warm up. Jory, you will stay here and guard him, as will Callian and Farron. Alistair ordered and held up a hand, stalling any protests. The rest of us will check out the missionaries' camp. After that we'll come back, try searching near the submerged ruins to the west. The group minus those left behind crossed the rocks again, this time one at a time while the others kept watch, Lina last as she could use her bow at a distance. You need to keep calm. Alistair said to Naruto, who had managed to keep his tongue as they moved away from the others. Someone needs to do something about that idiot. Naruto said. Jory is not used to fighting beside us. Give him time. Alistair said. Before or after he kills one of us or gets one of us killed through his actions. Naruto's right. That knight is a menace. More to us than the Darkspawn. Lina said as she stopped. We have trouble. On a ridge ahead they found group of genlocks armed with bows. Jory had rushed ahead from behind, obvious that he had followed and ignored order to remain behind, and now the others had to help him before he was killed. Arrows and magic arched overhead, and the short squat Darkspawn were all but finished as Jory charged up the short hill. Naruto reached the knight and kicked his legs out from under him. A dagger at his throat silenced his protests before they began. You were told to remain behind. It's obvious, Sir Knight, you don't listen. Naruto's eyes were showing murder. Naruto, that's enough. Alistair said and pulled the pissed off blonde off the knight. No, it's not. He was told to stay behind to guard the others, and yet he's here charging into danger like a demented lemming over a cliff. Lina nodded as she looked at the Shemlin and knew the knight was one of those that made her people hate the humans. Alistair sighed. What will you have me do? We can't tie him up, as tempting as that might be. The most I can do is inform Duncan once we return and let him discipline the idiot. And for me to call someone an idiot is saying something. The junior warden tried to get a laugh, but he could tell Naruto and Lina were really thinking of binding the knight to a tree and leave him. And it could be seen on Alistair's face that he didn't think that was a bad idea. XX. The group found the cache and wiped out some more Darkspawn. They returned to the others, and Alistair could tell they weren't happy to see Jory to return. There were several more dead wolves, and Alistair led the group on. They neared a bridge and were spotted by an emissary. Spells, arrows, and Jory rushed ahead, and none of them were surprised when Jory stepped on a leg trap. The knight swung his sword at the approaching Darkspawn as he finally managed to break the trap open. Alistair used his shield to cover the mage and archers, moving back and forth while they picked off Darkspawn. Naruto and the dwarves moved ahead in a wedge, cutting down the Darkspawn until Jory's swing nicked the armor of the Idouken, who cursed at him, while the dwarf rogue aimed and fired his crossbow, taking out the emissary. Farron showed Callian how to disarm traps. Neria cast a healing spell on Jory's leg. Naruto and Alyssa moved to check the bodies and recover arrows while Lina, Sarita, and the others kept watch. Farron gazed at Jory and muttered to the elf mage that she should have left him wounded. Naruto added a couple of potions to the sack while Alyssa added some coins and a couple of jewels. They followed the path and found a camp. Alistair was about to call for a rest when they were attacked as genlocks dropped their invisibility and attacked and were in turn quickly cut down. Davith suggested they burn the bodies, and as the first body hit the flames the others covered their noses. What a wonderful smell you discovered. Alyssa said. The dwarves shared a laugh. When Neria asked how the dwarves dealt with the dead Darkspawn, it was Sarita who answered. Leave them where they fall. There are carrion eaters that deal with the dead. And your own? The mage asked. Tombs of their ancestors, if the bodies can be recovered. Most of the time the damned Darkspawn eat their own and our own dead. Farron said. Callian shook her head. In the alienage we follow the way of the chantry and build a funeral pyre. Lina spoke next. Our dead we bury with the seeds of new trees. Jory and Davith were Furlden, so their practices were the same as Alyssa and Callian's. The group looked at Naruto. Back home we cremate the body and then bury the urn. He said, remembering Sarutobi's funeral when he was 11 and Asuma's not long after his return from his training trip with Jiraiya. Naruto called Alistair over. He showed him a note and a pouch he'd found amongst the bodies just over the bridge. We really shouldn't waste any more time. Alistair said. Let me take a small group. The map with the note suggested the site to dump the ashes wasn't far. Naruto pulled out the map. We'll meet up here near the lake before heading to those ruins, here. He pointed on the map. Where'd you get this? Alistair asked. Off of one of the bodies of the Darkspawn. I think they took it off of the scouts we saw hanging from that log. Alistair thought about it. Alright. Who do you want? Lina, Callian and Neria. No Jory. Alistair asked with a smirk. Only if you don't want him to come back. Naruto said. Good luck, and don't take too long. Naruto gathered his party and they crossed the stream and proceeded up the hill with the three elves. Lina looked back and saw the others continuing along the path. Hopefully we won't be long. Naruto said. I was thinking I could still hit Jory with an arrow from here. Lina said. They shared a chuckle as they finished the climb, trees blocking their view of the others. XX. At the top of the hill Naruto looked down at the ruins as the others recovered from fighting the armored demon. They had spread the ashes on the grave and moments later a black armored fiend appeared and attacked. Naruto had moved in and out attacking with his daggers, while Callian and Lina hit it with arrows. Neria's magic was the most effective as she hit several ice spells that locked it in place, and she cast a few other spells, her glyph holding it in place. When it finally fell Naruto dropped to his knees. He'd been shocked at the malice the demon gave off, it reminded him of Kyuubi in the early day. Naruto. The elf mage asked. I'm fine. I just need a moment. You were close to that thing. Just sit still. She told him and her hands glowed as she chanted the minor healing spell. Thanks. Naruto said feeling the chill leave him. You three ready to find the Warden hidden treasure? Maybe they managed to loose that idiotic Shemlin. Lina said gathering her and Callian's arrows. We're not that lucky. The city elf said. Duh. Naruto said as they took a different path down. If we were, none of us would be here. XX. They joined the others in the midst of battle. Naruto joined Alistair. Let me guess, our brave knight raced in. Alistair growled as he used his shield to bash a darkspawn back, leaving it open for the double arrows from Lina. The battle lasted a minute more, as the alpha in gold armor refused to go down. Naruto used Davith and Jory as a springboard to leap high into the air and came down burying both his daggers in the creature's skull, one of the blades snapped. Ah, man, Naruto said looking at his broken blade. Alyssa shook her head. You're far too rough on your gear. She said. Farron was looting the bodies when he discovered a pair of daggers. Here. He offered them to Naruto who was about to pull his remaining dagger from the darkspawn's skull. Looking them over he spun them around and gave a whistle. Their balance is perfect. Neria cast a spell. They've got some enchantments on them. I'll need to study them back at camp to tell you what. Naruto hooked the sheaths to his back and retrieved his soul dagger and sheathed it as well. He turned in time to see Sarita knock out Jory. Alistair was already heading into the ruins to search for the documents. Naruto and the others joined him. It was Farron who found the smashed and decayed chest. Jory had just entered when he gave a girlish scream and the others spun, seeing a woman standing at the back of the ruins. Naruto tensed as the woman didn't make a sound as she walked down the ramp. Well, what have we here? Naruto realized she was dangerous. The way she moved made him think of Anko and Kurenai. Her gold eyes made him think of them as well. Are you a vulture, I wonder? A scavenger poking amidst a corpse whose bones are long since cleaned. Yep, trouble, Naruto thought as he moved closer, putting himself between Neria and the newcomer. The others spread out as well. Jory and Davith looked nervous and ready to jump out of their hides. Naruto felt uneasy as they entered the gates of Ostagar. After meeting Morrigan and her mother he still felt a chill as he saw the old woman's eyes staring at him. While she had dismissed the others she had grabbed his arm after handing him the scrolls. Her words whispered for his ears alone had him wondering about the blight and the archdemon. Hey, are you paying attention? Naruto turned to find Callian standing in front of him. Sorry, was just thinking of the upcoming joining ritual. He said. What did you say? The elf rolled her eyes. While you were trying to get your brain to work the others have scattered. Alyssa and Neria have gone to see the kennel master and take him some herbs to heal the sick hounds. Jory, Davith and Alistair went to speak with Duncan. Farron and Sarita went to pawn off the loot that you all gathered from the dead. Naruto nodded. Since we have a bit of time, you want to grab a hot meal? The elf asked. Sure. Naruto agreed and followed Kallian through the bustling camp, his mind going back to the meeting with Morrigan's mother. Flashback. Listen well, little ninja, and hear my words. I know of what you carry. You must be careful. The joining is deadly, but for you it could strengthen the demon you carry. End flashback. What did she mean? The Kyuubi was taken from me, my chakra sealed. Naruto thought. He wished that he'd been able to talk to her more, but Alistair interrupted and Morrigan led them back to the gates of Ostagar before she left them, vanishing into the foliage. You going to eat that? Naruto looked down at the bowl and shrugged. Not really hungry, he said as he watched the slender elf inhale her food. He smiled and passed the bowl to her. Why don't you finish it? He chuckled as the city elf gobbled his food as well. After she finished, she looked at him. You still thinking of the joining? Yeah, I don't like agreeing to something that I don't know what I'm getting into. I did enough of that when I was younger. He saw the smirk and knew the elf was going to give him grief. There you two are. The pair saw Alistair walking up. Let's go. The others are gathered. Duncan wants to speak with you all before the joining. Naruto nodded, silently thanking the former Templar for the rescue from the mirthful-looking city elf. They followed him to Duncan's tent where the others were gathered before the bonfire. Good, you're all here. I've had the circle mages preparing. The blood you retrieved, we can begin the joining immediately. Duncan said after making sure they were all there. Naruto noticed how every time the joining was mentioned, Alistair seemed uneasy. It was Naria who asked. So the joining is dangerous? Yes, I will not lie about that. Duncan said. Sarita asked. What if we change our mind? Can we not do the joining and just join the army? Duncan sighed. With most of you I had to conscript you into the Grey Wardens. There is no turning back. Naruto noticed the hint of sadness in the older warrior's eyes. Alyssa spoke up from where she was kneeling next to rocks, the Mabri enjoying the attention of his mistress. Can you tell us about the joining now? Duncan nodded. As I said, I will not lie. We Grey Wardens pay a heavy price to become what we are. Fate may decree you pay your price now rather than later. Naruto looked around to see the results of that announcement. It's like the harrowing then. Naria asked, her voice soft. I'm sorry you have to go through such a trial again so soon. Duncan told her, I have no problem facing what is to come. Alyssa said softly, no different than exile to the deep roads. Serena said, bah, bunch of nughumpers are probably more dangerous. Let's do this. Farron said. One by one the gathered recruits spoke up till Duncan looked at Naruto. Death is but a door, time is but a window. Let's do this so we can get busy kicking Darkspawn. Duncan left them telling Alistair to bring them to the old temple. XX. They gathered around a table. Naruto leaned against a pillar. Jory and Davith were having a heated exchange. The former knight was whining about the coming ritual while Davith told him they could all die if it would stop the blight. Naruto saw Lina sitting away from the others, her eyes closed and the position she was in indicated she was meditating. It made him think of Shikamaru and he felt a pang. Clearing his mind of his friends and home, he fidgeted with his daggers. He nearly jumped when Kallian touched his shoulder. So, we come all this way to die? She asked. Anything is possible, Naruto said with a shrug. They stopped talking as Alistair returned with Duncan. Both wardens looked solemn. Naruto spotted the silver chalice Duncan carried. It was covered in runes and as the bearded warden passed, Naruto smelled blood. Well, now I know for certain what the Darkspawn blood was for. He thought as Duncan put the chalice down and turned to face the gathered recruits. At last we come to the joining. He began. The Grey Wardens were founded during the First Blight when humanity stood at the edge of annihilation. Sought it was the first Grey Wardens drank of Darkspawn blood and mastered their taint. Jory sputtered and looked around at the others. We're going to drink the blood of those creatures. His wide eyes showing fear. Naruto recalled hearing Jory and Davith talking and how the knight had a pregnant wife waiting for him. He came here looking for glory, but he doesn't want to pay the price. The whisker-marked blonde thought. Duncan walked around, looking at each of them as he continued to speak. As the first Grey Wardens did before us, as we did before you. This is the source of our power and our victory. Alistair stepped in the circle. Those that survive the joining become immune to the taint. He looked at his eyes landed on Naruto. We can sense it in the Darkspawn and use it to slay the archdemon. Those who survive. Lina said, and Naruto realized the delish elf was on his left while Kallian was to his right. Duncan spoke up, drawing their attention to him. Not all who drink the blood will survive, and those who do are forever changed. This is why the joining is secret. It is the price we pay. Duncan said and lowered his eyes in remembrance. He looked back up and gazed at each of them as he continued to speak. We speak only a few words prior to the joining, but these words have been spoken since the first. Alistair, if you would. Alistair stepped into the center and lowered his head for a moment. Join us, brothers and sisters. Join us in the shadows where we stand vigilant. Join us as we carry on the duty that cannot be forsworn. Naruto spotted Jori looking at the chalice nervously. And should you perish, know that your sacrifice will not be forgotten, and one day we shall join you. The air felt charged and Naruto could feel the tension from everyone. Davith, step forward. Duncan said, turning to grab the chalice. He presented the chalice and the former cutpurse. Everyone watched as Davith took a drink. Duncan took the chalice and stepped back. Davith staggered and then gave a scream and clutched his head. He doubled over in pain and then stood straight, and the others caught the sight of his eyes. They were glowing white. It was then that Davith started choking and soon fell forward, gasping before he died. I am sorry, Davith. Duncan said, and Naruto heard the regret in the older man's tone. He turned. Step forward, Jori. The knight shook his, stepping back. But I have a wife, a child. Had I known, Jori said, reaching back and drawing that great sword from his back. Duncan put the chalice down and drew a curved knife from his waist. There is no turning back. Duncan said. Jori backed up till his back hit a pillar. He held his sword in front of him protectively. No, he said. You ask too much. There is no glory in this. Jori whined and looked to the others for support. No one moved, and Jori lunged at Duncan, who swept the great sword aside and stepped forward and stabbed Jori in the chest. Jori gasped and looked shocked that Duncan had just killed him. Naruto studied the others. None of them seemed surprised. Duncan had told them there was no going back before they got here. He heard Duncan's, I am sorry, to Jori as he removed the blade and allowed the knife to fall to the ground. Duncan sheathed his blade and walked back to the altar, grabbing up the cup. He looked at Naruto. The joining is not yet complete. He presented the blood-filled chalice. You are called upon to submit yourself to the taint for the greater good. Naruto took a breath and lifted the chalice to his lips and took a mouthful. He fought the urge to spit it out and swallowed the vile blood, handing the chalice back to Duncan. From this moment forth you are a Grey Warden. Duncan said. Naruto didn't feel anything at first, then his head started to hurt and he heard faint whispers in the back of his mind. He didn't know his eyes had gone white like Davith's as he saw a great dragon roaring and he could nearly make out the words. Suddenly there was pain throughout his body, and as he unleashed a scream he was unaware his body was engulfed in red chakra. He didn't hear the others panic and scream his name. He didn't hear Duncan curse. The dragon's voice and roar was drowned out by that of a bigger predator. Did you miss me? Naruto knew only pain and then collapsed. Getting to his feet, Naruto looked around. The mental landscape, which was once a sewer and later Konoha, looked like a war zone. Buildings were ravaged and ransacked. Fires were all over. He shook his head and went to where the Forest of Death was located. The once great training ground was burning and he could hear familiar roars in the distance. Passing the smashed gates he walked a straight path, which wasn't hard since most of the trees were smashed, others were on fire. It took him what felt like 20 minutes before he reached the center. Where once the tower stood was rubble, and sitting in all his glory was the Kyuubi. Naruto started walking towards the nine-tailed demon lord when he spotted something under the Kyuubi's paw. What the hell is a dragon doing in here? The Kyuubi looked down and Naruto, who could read the fox's face, could see the grin. Hello, brat. Just having a discussion with this oversized geeko. The Kyuubi's deep voice rumbled. It's got delusions that it's some jumped-up archdemon. Naruto sighed. Kurama, not that it's nice to see you again, but I thought you were ripped out of me. Faye, like those incompetent losers could undo the work of the Shinigami. If it was your father, then maybe. The giant fox said, its 9 tails moving behind it. They managed to cut me off until you drank the tainted blood. Right now my chakra is flooding your system, that's why your body is in so much pain. So I'll be able to use jutsus again? Naruto asked hopefully. Yes and no. You can leap around like a monkey and enhance yourself again. But you'll need to use my chakra as they damaged your core. The Kyuubi said with a rough tone of disgust. It'll help against the Darkspawn at least. Naruto said. Darkspawn. Those wretched creatures are still around. Kyuubi lifted up its paw. You might be just a figment in the blood, but when the kid here faces you, you will see what a real demon lord and his Jinchuriki can do. You know of the archdemons? Naruto asked. Archdemons, snorts please. They were low-level demons, parasites that found a way to possess dragons. With their powers they made them stronger and larger, but they were weaker than Shukaku. Naruto was reeling. He had access to the Kyuubi's chakra. What will I be able to do? And won't your chakra burn me? The dragon roared and Kyuubi looked at it annoyed. Leaning down he ripped off its head. Enough out of you. I'll work on purging the taint this thing leaves. As for my chakra, I'll need month to alter your coils, and while there might be a slight discomfort, you'll be able to enhance your speed, strength as well as your healing factor, and I think that while you won't be able to use jutsus, maybe in this a big maybe you might be able to use kitsune magic. Kitsune magic? What is that and what can I do with it? Naruto asked. Hey, well you'd be able to use low-level flame magic, camouflage, some glamour and of course your tree climbing and water walking. Naruto sighed. My shadow clones. The Rasengan? He asked. That I don't know. And if you do it'll take training to use my chakra. And you won't be able to summon the toads. Why not? Naruto demanded. The Kyuubi stretched and yawned. Because you died back in Konoha. The moment you did your name faded on the contract. Kyuubi leaned down. For what it's worth Naruto, I am sorry. You've had a hard life and it's just became harder. Naruto reached up and touched the giant fox's snout. It's all right Kurama. We settled those issues when we defeated Akatsuki. At least I'm not going to be totally weak against the Darkspawn. And while I might be a ninja of Konoha, I can be somewhat of a ninja again in the ranks of the Grey Wardens. Naruto noticed his hands were fading. Looks like I'm waking up. I'll talk to you later. Kurama, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, nine-tailed demon lord watched as his container faded and let out a sigh. Now, let's get to work. He heard the roar of another dragon in the distance. With a snarl he let out his own challenging roar and thundered off into the fade portion of Naruto's mind and soul, eager to battle and show the so-called taint what it was up against. XX. Ostagar. Old Temple. Naruto regained consciousness slowly. Everything felt muffled like he was underwater and his vision was blurry. When he could see he found Alistair and Duncan hovering over him. Gah, he said. I must be in hell. Both senior wardens chuckled. It is finished. Duncan said. Welcome to the Grey Wardens. Who else did we lose? Naruto asked as Alistair helped him sit up and handed him a water flask. Drinking it, he gargled and spit, trying to rid the taste from his mouth. Only the dwarf, Farron. Alistair said sadly. With Jory and Davith it makes 3. In my joining only one of us died, but it was horrible. I'm glad so many of you made it through. Alistair looked sad and Naruto could tell he had questions. How do you feel? Duncan asked. Like I was run over by a giant toad. Naruto said. Alistair looked at him if he was insane. Such is what it takes to be a Grey Warden. Duncan said. Naruto looked around and spotted the others still unconscious off to the side. He saw that the bodies of Davith, Jory and Farron had been removed. Naruto felt bad for the dwarf. He had hoped that none of them would die. Jory brought about his own death. Alistair looked nervous. Did you have dreams? I had terrible dreams after my joining. He said, babbling in that way Naruto had noticed. Such dreams come when you begin to sense the Darkspawn, as we all do. That and many other things can be explained in the months to come. Naruto tensed and Duncan noticed. Naruto, can I ask what happened? I've never seen a reaction like yours during the joining. Duncan asked. Naruto looked at Alistair. Right. I'll check on the others. The former Templar walked away. The blood woke up Kyuubi. Naruto said softly. Woke him up. I thought he had been taken from you. Duncan said. No. They took my chakra and messed up my core. I still carry the Kyuubi. Naruto spoke softly. He was troubled in that he had lost a lot of abilities, but he would gain others. It would take time along with trial and error. Duncan was thoughtful. Will it cause trouble? He asked, thinking the last thing they needed was a Biju causing havoc during the blight. He's not happy to hear that the archdemons are still around. Kurama and I came to terms years ago. He'll be helpful. Can't have his prison cell appear to be weak. Duncan relaxed a bit. After this battle, I'll send a message to Tsunade. Naruto shrugged. It can keep. He looked at the others who were starting to stir. And Alistair went to each giving them a flask of water and making sure they were awake. Naria, once she was up, rushed over to Naruto. Are you okay? What happened? The elf mage fired questions and was checking him over. The others came over before he could answer. Well, you're alive, Lina said. She looked a bit better and Naruto remembered that she had been carrying the taint since she joined up. The joining dealt with the effects she'd been under. That or this is hell and you're all sent to tempt me. Naruto said. Kallian shook her head. What the hell happened? You were the only one to put on a weird light show. Yeah, figured the mage would be the one to glow or sparkle. Alyssa said, kneeling next to her Mayberry, which gave its mistress's hand a lick. Sarita was staring at him, the dwarf's brow furrowed in thought. Just a strange reaction. Duncan said, we'll talk about it after the battle. Naruto told them. Alistair came back and handed each of them a necklace with a clear locket filled with blood. Before I forget, there is one last thing to your joining. He told them. We take some of the blood and put it in a pendant, something to remind us of those who didn't make it this far. Alistair lowered his chin and Naruto thought of Farron, who in a short time had become a friend. Duncan watched as they each placed the pendant around their necks. Take some time, he told them. Alyssa, when you are ready, I'd like for you to accompany me to a meeting with the king. The female Kuzland looked surprised. What kind of meeting? The king is discussing strategy for the upcoming battle. I am not sure why he requested your presence. Duncan looked disturbed by this. It's at the west end of this ruin. Please attend as soon as you are able. Duncan turned to leave. Alistair, get them ready and assembled before my tent. I'll pass out assignments after this meeting. Alistair took a deep breath. Use this time to go over your weapons and armor. Once the battle begins, there'll be no running off to the quartermaster. He looked where Duncan was seen walking. Meet in front of Duncan's tent, he said and walked away. Alyssa looked troubled. We'll get your gear, Kallian said. Yeah, go and rub elbows with the king, Sarita said with a teasing grin. What did I miss? Naruto asked. When we got here, King Kallian greeted us. He was very interested in our Kuzland, Lina said, crossing her arms. I don't know why. I heard he's married. Stop, Alyssa said. I've known Kallian since we were children and my father took me and my brother to court. That wasn't a look of friendship he was giving you, Salraka, Sarita said. That was outright lust. Alyssa waved it off. Rocks, go with Naruto. She instructed her faithful hound and went down the stairs. Naruto shrugged. Come on. We need to get ready. As the others filtered out, Naria grabbed his forearm. Do you have a moment? Naruto looked at her and nodded. What did the demon say to you? The elf mage asked, and Naruto wondered how she knew about his personal demon. Duncan and Alyssa returned from meeting with the king. Duncan looked thoughtful while Alyssa had an annoyed look. What's wrong? Naruto asked the annoyed noblewoman. Our king has his head so far up he can belch and fart out of the same hole, Alyssa said, taking her pack, then patted Rocks on the head as she sat next to the dog before rummaging through her bag. Naruto raised an eyebrow, hoping that she would explain better, as he had very little interaction with the king. Alistair and I have been given the honor of lighting the beacon, Alyssa said with disdain. Now, everyone has a part to play, Duncan said. You mean we won't be in the battle? Alistair asked for verification. What about the others? Duncan sighed. Naria will be joining the rest of the mages. Lina and Kallian will join the archers, leaving Naruto, Sarita to join the other wardens. Alistair said. Want to trade? The female dwarf and Naruto both snorted, crushing Alistair's hopeful look. This is a personal request by the king, Duncan said to Alistair, who didn't look happy at hearing that. If the beacon is not lit, then Terran Loghane won't know when to charge. And the king needs to Grey Wardens to stand up there and hold the torch, just in case, right? Alistair said with a hint of mockery in his tone. Alyssa snorted. I agree with Alistair. This is a waste of our skills. Hell, a couple of Mayberry could do it, she said, getting a glare from her own warhound. She patted him on the head. Sorry boy, she said. Rocks gave her a look telling her that it was going to cost a stake for that comment. Duncan looked at them. That is not your choice, He looked around at the newest wardens, taking them all in before focusing on Alistair once more. If King Callian wishes for Grey Wardens to ensure that the beacon is lit, then Grey Wardens will be there. Duncan said, then looked at the others. We must do whatever it takes to destroy the Darkspawn, exciting or no, the last he said, looking first at Alyssa then at Alistair. Alistair sighed and spoke. I get it, he said reluctantly. He tilted his head towards Alyssa a bit and his voice carried to the rest of them. Just so you know, if the king ever asks me to put on a dress and dance the Remigold, I'm drawing the line. Darkspawn or no. Callian snorted. Lina gave him a strange look and muttered, you shem are shit crazy. Sarita's own. Surface folk are crazy as, Ronto shit. The former Idukan muttered to herself. Neria was picturing it in her mind and turned her head to giggle. Alyssa shared a look with Naruto and rolled her eyes. The former ninja shook his head. Way to make a stand, Alistair. Alistair turned and looked at Naruto and gave a half smile. I have my dignity. Well, some. Neria's giggles exploded. Oh, the image of you shimmying up and down the line. Alyssa snorted. I don't know if he's got the legs for it. Alistair took no offense. Right, and we can watch as the Darkspawn die laughing. Duncan groaned, then focused the group. The tower is on the other side of the ravine. Naruto took the time to check his gear over. Along with the daggers, he was carrying a sword as well as his quiver and arrows. Be careful, Callian said, touching his shoulder. You too, he said. You and Lina watch out for one another. Saradia stomped up. We should have a fallback meeting place. The dwarf said. Somewhere away from here if things go bad. The dwarf is right, Lina said. How about that village we passed on the way here? Callian suggested. The others nodded. A rally point is a good idea. Alyssa said. The king isn't planning anything beyond this battle. His head is so full of glory and songs he's blind to the dangers of battle. I read in a book in the circle that the Darkspawn were driving the races back until the Grey Wardens arrived. Naruto looked at each of them. We lost Farron, Jory and Davith before we even fought a battle. He said. Be safe. The others nodded and Alyssa with Rox joined Alistar heading for the tower. The city elf and Delish elf went to find their positions with the archers. The elf mage looked nervous before hugging Naruto and running to where the mages were preparing their spells and rituals to aid the army. Well, Salroka, looks like we get to be the tip of the sword. Sarita said, thumping him on the back. At least we won't be bored. Naruto said as they followed Duncan to where they were escorting the king. Before they joined His Majesty, Duncan pulled them aside. I know in battle it won't be easy, but I ask that you stay close to the king. Naruto understood. He'd done such when he was a ninja. Any questions? The warden commander in Ferelden asked and they shook their heads. Good luck and may the Maker watch over us. He said, and they were joined by the king and his guards, before taking the path to the valley that would be the battleground. Naruto found his mind thinking back to what had happened during his joining and wishing he had time to explore it, or ask deeper questions and hopefully get some answers from Duncan. XX. The thunder overhead ushered the release of the rain. Naruto smirked as Sarita cursed. How can you surface dwellers deal with this? She growled. It's just rain. But it will make footing harder by turning the ground to mud. Naruto said, trying to keep her calm and ignoring the chantry priests and priestesses moving amongst the troops saying prayers and being liberal with the incense. His eyes spotted the Darkspawn before they even broke the tree line. The skirmishes in the wilds hinted at the ferocity of the monsters, but seeing an army of them had several in the army taking steps back. As the rain fell, a ground fog drifted in. Naruto drew his bow and notched an arrow. He could see the Darkspawn as they worked themselves into a frenzy before the one in gold armor waved them forward. The Darkspawn horde gave roars and charged. Archers. The king's voice called out. Naruto took aim and when the signal was given his arrow joined the volley. Many Darkspawn died. Some were wounded only to be trampled by their brethren as they continued the charge. As the arrows continued to fly, the king's voice called out again. Hounds. And moments later over 100 Mayberry charged across the field. Naruto lowered his bow and watched as the war hounds and the charging Darkspawn clashed. He winced seeing the dogs cut down, but they in turn were taking an equal number of the Darkspawn with them. Sarita winced. Not good odds. A 1-to-1 trade-off there. The female dwarf said as she readied her weapon and shield. Naruto turned to see the king wince at the death of the faithful dogs. Then the king lifted his sword. For Ferelden. The cry went out and Naruto watched as the Grey Wardens and the army charged at the still approaching horde. Stay close. Naruto said, drawing the sword from his back and an extra dagger. Close as a nugget sucking a sow's tit. The Lady Iduken said. XX. The battle for Ostagar was brutal as numbers on both sides took heavy losses. The archers on the walls were soon faced with darkspawn that had broken through the lines and made it up to the camp. Kallian and Lina held a running battle but soon ran out of arrows. The pair fought back to back as around them others were dragged down. Lina spotted the mages being overwhelmed as the Templars that were guarding them fell, unused to this kind of combat. Both elves spotted the beacon being lit, but the reinforcements never arrived. May the dread wolf take them. Lina snarled as she spotted Loghain and his forces retreating. Kallian panted as she looked around. What do we do? Join up with Alyssa and Alistair. The city elf asked. No, the darkspawn have broken through, and no one has come from the tower. Fall back. We'll wait for the others at the town like we said. The Delish elf said as she slit the throat of a genlock. What about the mage? Kallian asked, not wanting to abandon the other elven warden. Lina sparred a look, where a burning boulder had smashed into the path. She'll have to fend for herself. The path is blocked and the other one is swarming with too many darkspawn. Kallian fell back with Lina, killing darkspawn that crossed their path. They hit the wilds and made their way north, both hoping to see the others alive as behind them Ostagar burned. XX. Neria Serana screamed in frustration as she watched the darkspawn break through the lines and was ignored by the senior circle mages and Templars. She wasn't surprised when the burning rocks slammed into the ground around them. One of the mages crushed, never knowing what had killed him. Nor was she surprised when the darkspawn came rushing out of the camp. She cast her limited spells as quickly as she could. Wind pulled her away as another burning boulder slammed into the middle of the gathered mages. The Templars, who were used to dealing with scared and intimidated mages, were no match for the savage and bloodthirsty darkspawn. Neria was exhausted by the time Wynne and her managed to escape offstage and was unconscious when they were joined by several other surviving mages and a lone Templar driving a wagon. Back to the circle. Wynne ordered as she worked on tending the wounds of the survivors, the warden mage unconscious and unable to say where she needed to go. XX. Naruto stabbed the broken blade of his sword into the skull of the ogre. He grabbed a wicked spear and seeing his target let fly, killing a genlock. He grabbed a wicked-looking longsword from a dead darkspawn. He spun seeing Sarita kneecap a hurlock and bash her shield into its skull. Having fun. Naruto called. The female dwarf grunted as she staggered to him. Her armor covered with blood, mostly darkspawn, but Naruto could see where some cuts in the armor were causing her to bleed. We need to retreat. Sarita said. Agreed. This has turned into a slaughter. Naruto had seen the beacon flare to life and no Loghain. Grab the king. Sarita said as they began to carve a path to reach the monarch. They saw the ogre break through and grab the king, squeezing him to death. They saw Duncan's heroic charge as he scaled the front of the large darkspawn. They were cut off as another wave of the horde broke through the barricade. Naruto spotted the golden-armored darkspawn as it used its vicious blade to kill Duncan. Damn it! Naruto cursed and kicked a darkspawn out of the way, not seeing it fly back a couple yards or that its ribs were powdered. Sarita, time to go. He yelled as he fought to clear a path. Yeah, but how the stone do we get out of here? The female dwarf demanded, ducking under a wild swipe and bashed the genlock who tried to kill her. This way. Naruto said as he fought a path past the barricade and led the dwarf into the wilds. XX. In the tower, Alyssa snarled as she fought with the darkspawn. You just had to whine. She said to Alistair. The mage who accompanied them was dead, killed by the ogre that they had found at the top of the tower. How was I to know that the darkspawn would tunnel up and take over the tower, killing the whole garrison here? Alistair said as his sword decapitated a hurlock. Rox was already down with several arrows into his shoulder. The Mayberry whined, getting Alyssa's attention. Stay down, boy, she said, shoving a darkspawn back and then stabbed it with her family's sword. There's no end of them. Alistair said and cried out as his shield gave up and was wrenched from his arm. Fall back. Alyssa called out as she moved forward, her dented shield barely surviving the encounter. What do you think? Jump. Alistair said. You first. Alyssa said and cried out as her shield was smacked aside by Hurlik and 4 arrows slammed into her, knocking her back to where her head connected with the stone floor. As she saw spots and her vision faded in and out, she saw Alistair take several arrows. This is it. At least I'll be with Mom and Dad again, she thought. I'm sorry, Fergus, you'll have to avenge our family on How, she thought as blackness claimed her. She heard a roar and wondered how big the darkspawn was that produced it. Naruto Uzumaki slumped against the boulder and looked at Sarita. The female dwarf was in obvious pain, yet neither could stop. They'd managed to escape Ostagar, but neither had made it unscathed. Naruto was covered with cuts, none deep, but he was exhausted as they'd run throughout the night and had several more skirmishes with bands of darkspawn. We can stop and rest, Naruto said, and the female dwarf growled at him. We keep moving, she said. Her axe and shield strapped to her back and the numerous bandages Naruto had applied stained with her blood. We don't know how far behind us the horde is and neither of us would stand another huge battle. They shambled along, Naruto looking back every so often. The both stopped when they heard something running through the woods. Sarita groaned as she pulled her axe and shield off her back. Naruto held up a ash warrior axe he'd found during their escape and one of his numerous daggers. They tensed hearing the sound getting closer and were ready to strike when a pale nearly white mayberry exploded from the deep grass. Stupid dog, Sarita said. Naruto went to a knee. Hey there. He put his dagger away. It was at the battle, he said, seeing the war paint and the gash on its side. The mayberry looked at Naruto and gave a bark. Are you hurt bad? He asked, and the mayberry approached and after several sniffs sat in front of Naruto, allowing him to inspect its wounds. I don't have any salves or potions left, but I have a shirt I can tear into more bandages, he told the mayberry. Sarita used the time to sit on a fallen log and took several shallow breaths as Naruto bandaged the war hound. It's the first thing we've seen since Ostagar that's not a darkspawn, she said, watching as the blonde wrapped the wounds as best he could. Hopefully we can find some supplies at Lothering, he said. What do you know about this village? Sarita asked. Naruto shook his head. Not much. I'm not from Ferelden and Duncan only gave me basic geography. I think he was planning on more after the blight was over. I do know as long as we follow the road we should reach it sometime after sunset if we keep walking. The dwarf looked up at the sky and quickly pulled her gaze to the ground. I don't like all this emptiness overhead. Give me stone and I can pretty much tell ya where I am and what's around me. Here, trees, grass, that all make weird noises. Underground, the creatures only make noise before they attack. Here they chirp and squawk, bark loudly and for no reason. Naruto chuckled and looked up when the warhound growled and followed its gaze. Sarita-chan, prepare for battle, he said, reaching for his remaining daggers. The dwarf followed his line of sight. Isn't that the bastard that killed Duncan? She asked softly, pulling her axe and shield from her back slowly. Aye, the big one in the fancy armor. The former heiress of the Idukans ran a total. First one to reach him wins. Loser buys the first round when we get to a tavern. Naruto was about to agree when the Mabari barked as if in agreement. You want in on this too? Another bark. The whisker-marked blonde shrugged. All right, but where are you going to get money? The darkspawn charged and the trio fought them off. When they got to the commander, it was the Mabari who dodged the wicked-looking saw-like sword and got its jaws around the darkspawn's throat as it tackled it to the ground. Sarita bent over trying to catch her breath. She watched as the dog savaged the monster's throat. Naruto chuckled. Well, it was a three-way tie until that. The dwarf looked at him as he began to loot the bodies. You're telling me that the dog wins? Naruto shrugged. Seems that way. He was surprised finding not only coins, a couple of gems and health poultices. He found scraps of rotted meat as well as a dead half-eaten cat. Naruto salvaged several daggers and rolled them and the rest of the gear up, and while Sarita was distracted he tried a simple sealing, smiling as everything vanished into the quickly made storage seal. Naruto gave a smile. While it had hurt, he was happy that he somehow got his chakra back. He knew that once he was secure he would take the time to explore. It raises a million questions, and with Duncan dead I'm not sure where to find the answers. The blonde thought. He had chakra, but it hurt to use it, and it made him wonder if the bigger the jutsu the more the pain. A bark drew his attention and he watched the Mabari who lifted its leg and peed on the darkspawn corpse. It was then that Naruto realized he hadn't checked the corpse yet and gave the warhound a flat look, which got him a dog equivalent of a laugh. XX. Elsewhere. Naria Sarana sat up gasping for air while looking around wildly. Win touched her arm. It's okay, you're safe. The elder mage said. Where am I? Where are the other wardens? The elf mage asked. The Templars told me the wardens fell. We haven't seen other survivors, but we're heading north back to the circle. Win said in her soothing voice. Naria looked around and saw 2 others with her and Win and 6 Templars. 2 badly wounded rode with the mages, another drove the wagon and the remaining 3 walked alongside the wagon. I need to go, Naria said after a moment looking around and then checking herself for any wounds. You're returning to the circle. The Templar driving snapped. I'm a Grey Warden, I need to find the others. She said. You're a mage. Naria rolled her eyes at the stubbornness of the Templars. Regardless, I am a Grey Warden. I am out of your sphere of control. Since her conscription, Duncan and the others had told her that the Templar Kingites and the Circle of Magi had no control over her. The wardens in the camp had been nice and she found her time with them, and the other new recruits had brought her a bit out of her shell and she wasn't going to let them bully her back into it. Standing up, she grabbed her staff and jumped out of the wagon. Hey, get back here. The nearest Templar demanded. My dear, is this wise? Win called after her. I have duties that I need to do, and playing with Templars who want to pick fights with mages isn't one of them. Looking around, she sighed, then looked at Win even as the 4 healthy Templars prepared to face off with her. Which way is Lothering? Win pointed back the way they'd come. We passed through there before the sun rose. The elder mage said. She sighed. Commander Cody, we really need to be going. And she is a warden. The lead Templar growled. If we see you again, he said, leaving the threat unfinished. Naria wasted no time as she turned to head back to find the others. Win watched her go and prayed for her safety. She adjusted the robes she wore so not to press on her wound that was already healing. She wasn't about to let the knights with her know that sometime during the night she had nearly died, and yet as the sun rose so too had she. She wanted to speak with the first enchanter and do some research before she did anything else. XX. Lothering. Callie and Tabris and Lina Mahariel stood over the dead highwaymen, both elves disgusted at the men who first tried to rob them, then discussed using them for pleasure and selling them to slavers. The city elf had buried her dagger in the speaker's throat a heartbeat before the Delish elf's arrow took down the other 2. The rest were disorganized without their leaders and fell quickly. I hate scum like them. Callian said, retrieving her blades as Lina retrieved her arrows. Shem like them just prove why their kind should be killed. Lina said. Not all humans are like them. Look at Naruto for example. Callian said as they walked down the stone steps. He is different, Lina admitted. So, should we wait here? And if so, how long? The city elf asked her wilder kin. 2 days. We'll stay here to keep an eye on the road. Lina said. Then let's fix this barricade. The darkspawn can't be far behind. Callian said. The pair worked setting up the barricade, letting people through with a warning not to linger. Both elves kept looking for their fellow wardens and wondering how long they should linger. XX. Between Lothering and Ostagar. Get a move on Alistair. Alyssa called back. She, along with Alistair and her faithful hound, had woken in the hut of the swamp witch and her daughter. Flemeth had rescued them from the tower and had healed their wounds. Alistair had been wallowing about the deaths of the other wardens. All of them might not be lost, she said to him as he moped in the swamp about Duncan's death. Alyssa looked at Morrigan, who Flemeth had insisted that she go with them. And the former Kuzland had a feeling that Morrigan's magic would be used greatly in the coming battles. She looked at the wild witch, who went out of her way to insult and belittle Alistair since they left the wilds and were on the road. Granted, Alistair's initial meeting before the battle had not endeared him to mother or the daughter, but the elder witch was better at ignoring slights. That, and if she really got annoyed, I doubt Alistair would never had left the swamp. Alyssa thought. The small group had yet to see Darkspawn, well-living ones, and it gave Alyssa hope that some of the others were heading for the meeting. She was about to yell at Alistair again when the sound of someone crashing through the woods drew her attention. Pulling her family sword and shield, she prepared for battle. Rox growled and stood ready to charge into battle, but his growl changed to a bark and he dashed into the foliage. Rox. Alyssa was worried. She didn't want to lose her faithful hound on top of her other losses. Instead of battle, she heard giggling. Parting the brush with her sword, she smiled. Naria, she said with a smile as her Mabri licked the pinned elven mage with his body and happily licked the mage's face, who was laughing and struggling to escape. Alyssa watched for a moment, then went to aid her fellow warden, pulling the dog off and laughing as she helped the elf to stand. By Andraste, it's so good to see you alive, Alyssa said, pulling the mage into a hug. Have you seen any of the others? Naria shook her head and explained how she woke up on a wagon bound for the circle. I got lost and I think Lothering is that way. She gestured, to which Alyssa shook her head. That way is Ostagar. You're on the Imperial Highway now and we can follow it to Lothering. Naria wilted. It's not fair. I spent my whole life in the tower and now I'm supposed to find my way in the world I've only read in books. Alyssa sheathed her sword and kept an arm around the other woman's shoulders. Well, you're with me and Alistair now. But was interrupted by Rox barking, and the Kuzland rolled her eyes, and of course Rox. We picked up a traveling companion, another mage. Alyssa led her back to the road where Alistair was moping but seemed to brighten seeing another warden, but saddened to hear she didn't know about any of the others. Well, it's one more Grey Warden than you started with, Morrigan said. Maybe Duncan made it, Alistair said, ignoring what Flemeth had told him of her account of the final moments of the battle. Mother told you he and the king fell within moments of one another. Building up a false hope is foolish, the Wild Witch said unkindly. Well, she was wrong about there being other wardens, Alistair said. If Mother was wrong, then it is because the others weren't in a position to be seen. Honestly, you need to face facts and move ahead. The group fell into silence as they continued on their way. Naria tried to talk with Morrigan, but the witch from the wilds either ignored her or made snide comments that the elf ignored, as she'd lived around Templars for years. Alistair followed in silence, twitching whenever Morrigan made a snide comment at the elf mage. The group rounded the bend, surprised by what they encountered.